5 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I found my maid of honor standing between two security officers while my father pointed toward the exit. Marissa still had one hand around her bouquet, but my mother was already reaching for it. Before I could ask what was happening, Mom pulled the flowers from Marissa's hand and placed them in my younger sister Jenna's. "Family comes first," she said. Like those 3 words settled everything. Jenna adjusted her grip on the bouquet and moved toward the spot beside me as though the decision had already been made. I walked straight to her, took the flowers back, returned them to Marissa, then turned to the security manager. 3 minutes later, Marissa was standing beside me again, and my parents and sister were the ones being escorted toward the exit. Before I tell you what happened next, I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from. Stay with me, because what happened at that exit changed the way I understood my family, my money, and almost every favor they had ever asked of me. And if you enjoy stories about families discovering that loyalty does not mean surrender, please subscribe and stay with me through the rest of this one. My name is Allison Pierce, and when this happened, I was 38 years old. I am telling you about it now, because enough time has passed for me to understand something I could not fully see that morning. My parents did not suddenly become unreasonable at my wedding. They had been testing the same boundary for years. The only difference was that, on my wedding day, they finally pushed against one I was no longer willing to bend. The bridal room had been calm less than 10 minutes earlier. My veil was pinned, my shoes were on, and Marissa was checking the emergency kit she had carried around all morning, as if she had been assigned to keep the entire building from collapsing. Adam was somewhere on the other side of the venue with his groomsmen, and the coordinator had just told us that the ceremony would begin on time. Then one of the bridesmaids opened the door and told me security was asking for Marissa. By the time I stepped into the hallway, my father, James, was already speaking in the flat, controlled voice he used when he wanted strangers to assume he was the most reasonable person in the room. "She became aggressive with Jenna," he was saying. "We're not taking chances right before the ceremony." Marissa looked at me, not at him. That told me more than Dad's explanation did. She was angry, but she was not out of control. I had known Marissa for almost 20 years. When she was furious, she got quieter. She did not threaten people. She did not make scenes. More importantly, she had no reason to start one 5 minutes before my wedding. One of the security officers explained that they had received a complaint about a disturbance in a restricted area and were asking Marissa to step outside while they de-escalated the situation. He did not say she was guilty. He did not say she was banned from the wedding. My father had simply spoken as if those decisions had already been made. Then Mom made the mistake that clarified everything. She took Marissa's bouquet, not because security asked her to, not because anyone needed the hallway cleared. She took it, turned, and placed it directly into Jenna's hands. Family comes first. For a second, nobody moved. Jenna looked almost embarrassed, but not embarrassed enough to hand the flowers back. She shifted them against the front of her dress and stepped closer to me. I wish I could tell you that sentence shocked me. It did not. What shocked me was how quickly I understood what they were doing. Mom and Dad had spent months telling me that Jenna should stand beside me during the ceremony because she was my sister. I had said no every time. Marissa was my maid of honor because she had earned that place in my life, not because of blood, tradition, or family photographs. 3 days before the wedding, Mom had tried one last compromise. Jenna could stand beside me during the ceremony, she said, while Marissa could still technically keep the title. I told her no. Dad accused me of turning something small into a principle. I told him it had become a principle when they refused to accept my answer. Now they had waited until the guests were seated, the music was ready, and I was supposed to be too frightened of causing a delay to resist them. That was their miscalculation. I walked to Jenna and held out my hand. "Give me the bouquet," she stared at me. "Allison, seriously?" I kept my hand out. Mom stepped between us. "Do not do this right now." I looked past her at Jenna. The bouquet. Jenna's mouth tightened. She handed it over. I gave it back to Marissa. Then I turned to the man wearing the venue security badge. His name was Victor Grant. I knew because Adam and I had met him during our final walkthrough. Victor, Who requested that Marissa be removed? My father did, I said before Dad could answer. Did Adam or I authorize that? Victor glanced from me to Dad. We received a safety complaint. We're separating the parties while we assess it. That's fine. But is there any independent reason right now that Marissa cannot return to the ceremony area? He looked toward the two officers, then back at me. Not at the moment, no. Dad immediately stepped forward. I told you she threatened my daughter. You reported an incident, Victor said. We're handling the incident. Dad hated that answer because it did not give him control. I asked Victor one more question. Who are the contracting parties for this wedding? You and Mr. Bennett. Then Marissa stays in my wedding party. Mom made a sharp sound behind me. You are choosing a friend over your sister at your own wedding. I turned to her. No, I am choosing who stands beside me at my wedding. Those are not the same thing. Jenna folded her arms. So, I'm supposed to just sit there after she came at me? Marissa finally spoke. I asked you to stop going through Allison's things. Jenna's face changed. That was all Marissa said. Later, I learned Jenna had been moving place cards and checking the bridal table because Mom had told her there had been a mistake in the ceremony lineup. Marissa had stopped her, they argued. Jenna called Dad. Dad saw an opportunity. At that moment, however, I did not need the full story. I only needed to know that Marissa was standing calmly beside me, while my father was raising his voice at a security manager, and my mother was still insisting Jenna should take her place. Victor asked Dad to step away from the restricted hallway. Dad refused. Mom said they were the bride's parents. Jenna said the whole situation was ridiculous. I looked at Victor. I want all three of them to leave the event. The hallway went silent. Mom's face lost color. Excuse me? You heard me. You are not throwing your parents out of your wedding. I'm asking the venue to remove 3 guests who interfered with my wedding party after I told them repeatedly not to. Dad laughed once without humor. This is Marissa talking. No, this is me. That sentence mattered. My family had spent years blaming my boundaries on whoever happened to support them. If I said no to Jenna, someone had influenced me. If I refused to lend money, Adam was controlling me. If I stopped answering Mom's calls during work, Marissa was putting ideas in my head. They preferred believing I was being manipulated to accepting that I had made a decision they did not like. Victor told my parents and Jenna they needed to move toward the main exit while the situation was resolved away from the ceremony space. Dad argued all the way down the corridor. Mom kept asking whether I understood what I was doing. Jenna walked between them, with her arms folded and her eyes fixed ahead. Marissa remained beside me. 3 minutes after I had found her with security, she was back where I had chosen her to be. I should have turned around then and gone back to the bridal room. Instead, Dad looked over his shoulder and said, If you do this, Allison, there will be consequences. Something in me went very still. For 12 days, I had been carrying a question I had promised myself I would not ask until after the wedding. I had wanted documents first. I had wanted certainty. I had wanted to avoid accusing my own parents of something serious based on suspicion alone. But watching my father use the word consequences while security waited to escort him out made that patience feel different. I pulled my phone from the small pocket inside my dress. Actually, I said, there's one thing I want answered before you leave. Dad's expression changed just slightly. Mom looked at him. I opened the screenshot I had saved from the lender's fraud portal. Why is there a $48,000 loan in my name going into Mom's old joint account? Nobody spoke. That silence lasted only a few seconds, but I remember every part of it. Dad stopped moving. Mom's eyes went directly to him before she looked at me. Jenna lowered her arms. I had not told them I had found the loan. Adam knew. Marissa knew. The lender's fraud department knew. My parents did not. At least, that was what I had believed. Dad recovered first. This is not the place for that conversation. I almost laughed. He had just tried to remove my maid of honor from my wedding 5 minutes before the ceremony, but apparently the hallway outside my wedding was not an appropriate place for difficult family conversations. I agree, I said. That's why I planned to ask you after the wedding. I'm asking now. Allison, Mom said, please. Did either of you open a loan in my name? Dad stepped toward me. Victor moved slightly between us. Not dramatically. Just enough to remind him that he was still being escorted out. We were handling a temporary situation, Dad said. That was not an answer. I looked at Mom. Did you know about it? She pressed her lips together. Mom, it was supposed to be paid back before you ever had to worry about it. Everything around me seemed to go quieter. Not because the hallway actually became silent. I could still hear movement from the ceremony room. I could hear someone adjusting chairs. I could hear music testing faintly through the closed doors. But that sentence pushed everything else away. She had not said she did not know what I was talking about. She had not said there had been a mistake. She had not even asked how I found out. She had said it was supposed to be paid back before I had to worry about it. Which meant there was something to pay back. Which meant they knew. Which meant they had planned for me not to know. Dad turned sharply toward her. Sharon? Mom looked as if she wanted to pull the words back into her mouth. Jenna spoke for the first time since I mentioned the loan. Can we not do this here? I looked at her. There was something about the way she said it that bothered me. Not confusion. Not shock. Irritation. I filed that away. Dad lowered his voice. We can explain everything tomorrow. No. His eyebrows lifted. The fraud investigation was opened 12 days ago. I said. I froze my credit the same day. I told the lender I did not authorize that loan. I was waiting until I had enough information before I accused anyone. Mom stared at me. You reported it as fraud? I did not apply for it. You could have called us first. I did not know you were involved. You know now, Dad said quickly. So we can fix this privately. That was when I understood something I would spend the next several months learning in much greater detail. Dad did not hear the word fraud and think about what had been done to me. He heard it and thought about a problem he needed to contain. I slipped my phone back into my dress. I'm getting married. Mom blinked. Allison, listen to me. No, I have listened to you for long enough today. Victor asked them to continue toward the exit. Dad looked at me as if I had failed some test of loyalty. Mom looked terrified now, but not about missing the ceremony. Jenna looked angry. I watched them disappear around the corner. Then I went back to the bridal room. My hands finally started shaking when I closed the door. Marissa did not tell me to calm down. She did not tell me what I should do. She set the bouquet on the table and asked, Do you want to stop? I looked at myself in the mirror. My veil was still in place. My makeup was still intact. Somewhere beyond the wall, Adam was waiting for me. No. Do you want 5 minutes? No. Do you want me beside you? I looked at her. Yes. She nodded. Then that's where I'll be. That was all. A few minutes later, the doors opened. There were 3 empty seats in the front row. I noticed them. Then I looked at Adam, and I walked toward him. I did not let my parents take the ceremony too. We got married that afternoon exactly as we had planned, except for the people who had chosen not to respect the plan. Marissa stood beside me. Adam held my hands. When I said my vows, I meant them. For those few minutes, I refused to think about banks, fraud departments, old accounts, or why my mother had known there was money to pay back. I thought I had contained the damage. I thought the worst thing my father had done that day was call security on my maid of honor. After the ceremony, when I finally checked my phone again, there was a voicemail from the lender's fraud investigator. She said they had found discrepancies in the application that went beyond a simple banking error, and she needed me to verify some identity and contact information first thing the next morning. I listened to the message twice. Then I looked through the reception doors at the empty chairs where my parents and Jenna should have been. For the first time, I stopped wondering whether my family had crossed a line. I started wondering how far across it they had already gone. 12 days before my wedding, I was sitting at my kitchen counter comparing 2 versions of the seating chart when my phone buzzed with a credit monitoring alert. I almost dismissed it. Wedding week had trained me to assume every notification was either a vendor asking for confirmation or someone in my family finding a new reason to question a decision I had already made. But the alert was not about flowers, table assignments, or my mother wondering whether Jenna should sit closer to the head table. It said a new hard inquiry had appeared on my credit report. I stared at the lender's name for several seconds because I knew I had not applied for anything. Adam and I had agreed months earlier that we would not open new credit until after the wedding. We were planning to look seriously at houses the following year, and I did not want unnecessary activity on either of our reports. I opened the monitoring app and checked the inquiry again. Then I checked my email, searched the lender's name, and looked through every financial folder I kept on my laptop. Nothing. No application. No quote request. No forgotten form I had filled out while comparing mortgage rates. I pulled my credit report and found the account attached to the inquiry. It was not a credit card. It was a personal loan for roughly $48,000. My name was on it. The balance was almost the full original amount, which meant the money had been released very recently. My first reaction was not that my parents had done it. That matters, because by the time my mother admitted knowing about the loan outside my wedding ceremony, it would have been easy to rewrite the story in my head and pretend I had suspected them from the first second. I did not. My first thought was identity theft by a stranger. My second was a lender error. My third was that perhaps I had somehow authorized an inquiry connected to something Adam and I had discussed and forgotten about it. None of those explanations felt likely, but they were still explanations. I was not going to accuse anyone of stealing my identity simply because a number appeared on a screen. I called the lender immediately. The representative asked me to verify my identity, then pulled up the account. I told her I had not applied for the loan and had only discovered it through a credit alert. Her tone changed almost at once. She transferred me to the fraud department and told me not to make any payment on the account while they reviewed it. The fraud representative asked whether I recognized the mailing address, phone numbers, or bank information associated with the application. She could not give me every detail yet, but she confirmed the application contained my correct legal name, date of birth, social security number, and an income figure close enough to my actual salary that it did not look random. That was the first moment I felt truly cold. A stranger could buy stolen identity data. I knew that. But the accuracy still bothered me. Whoever had applied knew more than my name and birthday. They had enough information to make the application look plausible. I froze my credit with the major bureaus before the call was over. Then, I changed the passwords on my banking accounts, email, credit monitoring service, and anything else connected to financial recovery. I enabled stronger authentication where I had been lazy about it. I wrote down the exact time I discovered the loan, the name of every representative I spoke with, and the case number the lender gave me. The fraud department sent me an affidavit stating that I had not opened or authorized the account. I completed it the same afternoon. I did all of that before I called Adam. He answered from his office and knew something was wrong from the first word out of my mouth. I told him the facts in order because that was how my brain worked when I was scared. Hard inquiry. Personal loan, $48,000. My information. Not mine. Do you want me to come home? He asked. No, not yet. Are you sure? Yes, I froze everything. The lender opened a fraud case. I'm changing passwords now. He was quiet for a few seconds. Do you think you know who did it? I don't know anything yet. That answer was more important than it sounded. I had spent years learning not to let my family turn every disagreement into an argument about motives. Facts first had become a kind of armor for me. If I knew what happened, I could decide what I thought about it. If I started with what I felt, my parents had a way of dragging the conversation into what I supposedly owed them. Adam asked what the lender had told me about where the money went. They only confirmed it was deposited into a checking account connected to my name. Your account? I don't know yet. Could it be one of ours? No, I checked. He did not tell me to call my parents. He did not tell me to call the police. He asked what I wanted to do next. I want the account information, I said. Then I want to know whether this is fraud, a bank mistake, or somebody I know. And the wedding? I looked at the seating chart still open on my laptop. My parents' names were printed at the front table. Jenna's name was 2 tables away from us because that was where I had finally put her after 3 revisions and 1 argument with my mother. The wedding is still happening. Adam gave a short laugh, not because anything was funny, but because he knew me. I figured you were going to say that. I am not spending the next 12 days accusing people with no evidence. If the lender finds something real, I'll deal with it. Until then, I'm not giving my family another crisis to orbit around. That sounds reasonable. It sounds controlled. That too. He knew the difference. I was not calm. I was organizing. The lender called again later that afternoon with 1 more piece of information. The deposit account attached to the loan included my name as an owner. I asked for the last few digits. When the representative read them, something old and uncomfortable shifted in my memory. I knew that account. My mother had opened it with me when I went to college. At 18, I had been nervous about handling rent, books, and tuition refunds, and Mom had wanted access in case I needed help. Back then, it had seemed ordinary. I used the account through college and for a few years afterward. Eventually, I moved my banking elsewhere, opened accounts that were mine alone, and stopped thinking about the old one. Mom still used the original bank, but I had assumed that account was either closed or functionally irrelevant. Apparently, I had never removed my name. I logged into the bank and spent nearly 20 minutes working through old recovery questions before I finally got access. The account was still active. That surprised me almost as much as the loan. There were recent transactions, not mine, regular deposits and payments that made it clear this was not some forgotten dormant account gathering dust. My mother had been using it. My name had simply remained attached to something I had mentally left behind years ago. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. For the first time, the idea of my parents crossed my mind. Not as a conclusion. As a possibility. I hated it immediately. I wanted the account to belong to someone else. I wanted the lender to call and tell me there had been a clerical mistake. I wanted to discover that some criminal in another state had used old data from a breach because, as insane as that sounds, a stranger stealing from me would have been simpler. A stranger would not have known which conversations to weaponize afterward. A stranger would not have expected forgiveness. I requested the account statements and transaction details I was legally entitled to as a joint owner. The online history showed enough to confirm that a large deposit had hit the account shortly before my credit alert, followed by a large outgoing transfer. The expanded transaction information was still processing, so I could not yet see the full destination. That was frustrating. But it also kept me from jumping to the easiest conclusion. Mom using the account did not prove she had opened the loan. It did not prove Dad knew. It did not prove Jenna had anything to do with it. I wrote those 3 sentences in my notes because I needed to see them. Then I called Marissa. I had not originally planned to tell anyone, besides Adam, until I had more information. But Marissa had known me long enough to recognize when I was carrying something alone. More practically, she remembered my family history better than almost anyone, including details I had stopped thinking about. She had been there when my father first asked me to co-sign for Jenna's business 3 years earlier. She had been there when I said no. When I told her about the loan, she went silent in exactly the way she did when she was furious. Say something, I told her. I'm deciding which thing I'm allowed to say. You're allowed to say anything. No, because if I say what I'm thinking, you'll think I'm pushing you toward a conclusion. That was why she was my maid of honor. I rubbed my forehead. I have the same conclusion sitting in the back of my mind. Do you have proof? No? Then, don't treat it like proof. I let out a breath. Thank you. What do you need from me? Help me remember. The old bank account. Did I ever tell you I closed it? No. You told me you stopped using it after you switched banks. That distinction irritated me because it was probably true. I should have removed my name. Maybe. That's an administrative mistake. It's not permission for somebody to open a loan. I knew that, but hearing it mattered. Marissa asked whether I wanted her to come over. I said yes. She arrived about 40 minutes later carrying coffee and a legal pad, which made me laugh despite myself. Very subtle, I said. You called the right friend. We sat at the kitchen counter, where the seating chart was still open. Marissa wrote down the timeline while I talked. When had I last used the account? When had Dad asked me to co-sign? Had Jenna ever had access to my tax information? Had Mom ever helped me with paperwork after college? Which family members knew my salary range? Which addresses appeared on old records? We did not answer every question. We did not need to. The point was to separate what we knew from what we were guessing. At one point, Marissa asked, "Do you want me to tell you what I think?" "Not yet," she nodded. "Then I won't." There was no offense in her face, no need to prove she was right. She simply turned the legal pad around and pushed it toward me. "That's what we know." I looked down. A loan existed in my name. I did not authorize it. The money went into an old joint account attached to my mother. My mother still actively used that account. A large transfer went out shortly afterward. That was all. It was enough to scare me. It was not enough to accuse anyone. That night, after Marissa left and Adam came home, I logged into the old account again. I clicked through statements from years earlier and found transactions I had completely forgotten. Tuition refunds, grocery stores near my college apartment, a deposit from my first real job after graduation. One statement from when I was 17 or 18 had been scanned into an old folder because Dad had once used it to teach me how banking worked. I remembered the afternoon so clearly that for a few seconds I could smell the coffee he had been drinking. Dad had sat beside me at the dining room table with a bank statement between us and circled fees with a pen. He had explained interest, overdrafts, automatic payments, and why I should never sign anything just because someone told me it was routine. "Never sign anything you haven't read," he had said. At 17, I thought he was being overly serious. He told me people got into financial trouble because they trusted the wrong person at the wrong moment. "Even family?" I had asked, teasing him. "Especially family if money gets involved," he said, then smiled and tapped the statement. "Trust people. Verify paperwork." It was a good memory. That made everything worse. My father had not been some lifelong villain waiting for the chance to steal from me. He had taught me things. He had shown up for me. He had been proud when I got my first real job. He had helped me build the habits that were now telling me something was wrong. That was why I refused to call him that night. If I was wrong, I could never take the accusation back. If I was right, 12 more days would not change what they had done, and the lender was already investigating. Adam came up behind me and rested his hands lightly on my shoulders. "You okay?" "No." "Do you want to talk?" "I want the statement." "The transfer?" "Yes." "And then?" "Then I decide." He nodded. No lecture. No rescue. That became the rule for the next several days. I checked the fraud portal once in the morning and once at night. I answered the lender's questions. I documented everything. Then I closed the laptop and went back to my wedding. Mom called me 3 times about seating. Dad texted to ask whether Jenna could stand closer to me during the ceremony. Jenna sent a picture of 2 dress options and asked which one looked more bridal party appropriate, even though she was not in my bridal party. Every interaction felt different because of what I knew might be hiding underneath it. But I did not change my behavior. I did not hint. I did not test them with questions. I did not go looking for a confession before I had facts. That restraint would later become one of the things my mother called cold. At the time, I considered it fairness. 2 days after I first found the loan, the bank sent confirmation that my request for expanded transaction information had been received. The representative I spoke with could see the outgoing transfer, but told me the detailed beneficiary information was still being processed for the statement package attached to my request. "What can you tell me now?" I asked. The transfer happened the same day the large deposit cleared. "How much?" She gave me the amount. Almost all of it. My stomach tightened. "Can you tell me who received it?" "Not from the summary screen I'm looking at. The expanded detail should show more once the request finishes processing." I thanked her and hung up. That was not a dramatic revelation. No sirens, no confession, no name appearing magically on my screen. Just a deposit and a transfer. Money entered an account connected to my mother. Then almost all of it left. I added the date to my notes. For the first time, I wrote Dad's name and Mom's name at the top of a separate page. Not under guilty. under possible access. Then I closed the notebook because Adam and I had a final call with the florist. Looking back, that may sound absurd. $48,000 had appeared in my name, and I spent the next hour discussing centerpieces. But that was exactly what I meant when I said I believed I could compartmentalize anything. I had handled the immediate risk. The investigation was moving. I had no new facts to act on, so I went back to the life I had built. I did not understand yet that my parents had built their entire strategy around that quality in me. I thought being able to stay functional under pressure made me difficult to hurt. They had learned to see it another way. They thought it made me safe to hurt. By the time I was 35, I had stopped mistaking my family's pattern for bad luck. When we were children, Jenna was always the one in crisis, and I was always the one who could handle disappointment. Sometimes the crisis was real. She broke her wrist the week of my high school awards dinner, and Mom left before my name was called because Jenna was crying in the emergency room. I understood that. What stayed with me was not that Mom left. It was what she said when I asked whether Dad could at least stay. "You understand, honey. You'll be fine." Years later, when Jenna's college boyfriend dumped her the night before my promotion dinner, Mom asked if we could move the dinner to another weekend, because Jenna shouldn't have to be alone. I said no. Mom came anyway, but spent most of the evening checking her phone and telling relatives Jenna was having a terrible night. I remember being irritated more than hurt. I had learned by then that if Jenna had a problem, the emotional temperature of the whole family changed around her. I was not the silent daughter who smiled through all of it. I argued. I left dinners. I hung up on my mother when she pushed too far. Once, after Dad told me I was being selfish for refusing to cover one of Jenna's overdue car payments, I did not speak to either of them for 3 weeks. That was important to me, because I knew how easy it would be for someone hearing the story later to ask why I had let any of this continue. The truth was that I had not let them do everything. I had spent years putting up boundaries. The problem was that my parents treated every boundary as the opening position in a negotiation. If I said no, they heard not yet. If I said I was not paying, they heard convince her. If I said I had already made a decision, they heard she is upset right now. The first time I understood how far that could go was 3 years before my wedding, when Dad asked me to co-sign for Jenna's business. Jenna had opened a small home staging and interior styling company a few years earlier. In the beginning, it had done well enough for her to look successful from the outside. She had a polished website, professional photos, a rented studio, and a talent for making every project look bigger than it was. Mom talked about the business constantly. She loved telling people Jenna had built something from nothing. Dad liked introducing her as an entrepreneur. I was proud of Jenna too, at least at first. She had always been creative, and when she was focused, she could charm a client into believing a room needed exactly the thing she wanted to sell them. The problem was that Jenna was better at presentation than restraint. She upgraded the studio before she needed the space. She bought inventory before she had confirmed clients. She hired a part-time assistant because she said successful companies needed to look successful before they felt successful. Dad defended every decision by saying growth required risk. Mom called it ambition. I called it expensive. I kept that opinion mostly to myself until Dad asked me to guarantee a loan. He invited me to lunch and waited until the food arrived before bringing it up. That was one of his habits. He liked to put difficult conversations inside normal settings, as if the waiter refilling water glasses somehow made the request reasonable. "Jenna has a chance to take the business to the next level," he said. I remember cutting into my salad and thinking that sentence had never once led anywhere good. "What does the next level cost?" Dad smiled slightly. "That's the practical Allison I know." "How much?" He told me the amount. It was not astronomical, but it was enough that I stopped eating. "What's the loan for?" "Expansion. That's not a category." He sighed. "Inventory. Working capital. A larger client contract. She has expenses before payment clears." "What do her numbers look like?" "She has work coming in." "That's not what I asked." Dad leaned back. "You know I wouldn't ask if I didn't think she could handle it." I know you wouldn't ask if you didn't think I could. His expression tightened. That was the part of our relationship that neither of us said out loud very often. Dad respected my financial judgment. He also believed that respect gave him a claim on it. I asked for Jenna's revenue, current debt, monthly overhead, and the terms of the loan. Dad answered some questions vaguely and told me others were too detailed for lunch. I told him if the details were too inconvenient to discuss, my credit was too inconvenient to use. He accused me of making family help sound like a bank board meeting. I'm literally being asked to take responsibility for a bank loan? She's your sister. That doesn't change what co-signing means. She wouldn't miss payments. Then she shouldn't need me. Dad's jaw shifted, the small movement that meant I had reached the point where he no longer considered the conversation practical and had started considering it disloyal. He told me Jenna had already put years into the business. He told me one difficult quarter should not erase everything she had built. He told me he and Mom had helped as much as they could, and this was just one more bridge. I said no. He asked me to think about it. I said I had. He called the next morning. I still said no. Mom called that evening and told me Dad had come home really disappointed. I said disappointment was not a reason to sign debt. Then Jenna texted me. She did not ask directly. She wrote, "Dad said you're not comfortable helping with the expansion. I guess I thought you believed in me more than that." I did not answer immediately because I knew whatever I wrote would be repeated. Instead, I opened my email. I wrote to Dad, Mom, and Jenna together. I told them I loved Jenna and hoped the business succeeded. I told them I was not willing to co-sign, guarantee, borrow, pledge my credit, or authorize my name to be used for any debt connected to Jenna or her company. I wrote that I wanted the answer in writing because I did not want another round of conversations where my decision was treated as temporary. I kept the email short. No anger, no insult, no lecture, just no. Dad responded with one line, "Message received." For 3 years, I thought it had been. That email was sitting in an old folder 12 days before my wedding while I was trying to understand a $48,000 loan I had never applied for. I did not remember it immediately. At that point, I was still trying not to connect dots before I knew whether they belonged on the same page. But somewhere in the back of my mind, that lunch with Dad had already started to return. The wedding had created a different argument with the same structure. I chose Marissa as my maid of honor 6 months before the ceremony. Mom asked whether I had told Jenna yet. The question itself irritated me. Told her what? That Marissa is maid of honor. Yes. And she's okay with that? She said congratulations. Mom gave me a look. That isn't the same as being okay. I was standing in my parents' kitchen when she said it. Jenna was not there. Dad was reading something on his tablet at the table. "Mom, I'm not choosing a maid of honor based on who is least upset. She's your sister. And Marissa is my best friend. She can still be in the wedding." She is, as maid of honor. Mom opened the refrigerator harder than necessary. People are going to think it's strange. Who? Family. Then family can ask me. Dad finally looked up. "Your mother is saying it creates an impression." "Of what?" "That you and Jenna aren't close." I almost laughed. "We aren't that close." Mom turned around. "You don't need to announce it." "I'm not announcing anything. I'm choosing the person I trust most to stand next to me." Dad put down the tablet. "This is exactly what I mean. Everything has to be a statement with you." "No, Dad. Sometimes a choice is just a choice until everyone else refuses to accept it." The conversation ended because I left. 2 days later, Mom called and tried a softer version. She said she understood Marissa had been there for me through a lot. She said she was not asking me to remove her. She only wondered whether Jenna could stand on the other side of me so the family photographs would look balanced. I said no. Then she suggested Jenna give a reading. I said we had already chosen the readings. Then she suggested Jenna hold my bouquet during part of the ceremony. I asked why. Mom said, "So she has a special role." I told her Jenna was my sister. She already had a special role. That should have been the end. It was not. One of the reasons I loved Marissa was that she never treated access to me like something she had won. She did not care whether her dress was different from the bridesmaids' dresses. She did not care whether her name appeared first in the program. She did not care where she stood in photographs, as long as I was happy with them. A month before the wedding, we were reviewing the ceremony timeline together when the coordinator asked whether I wanted Marissa to manage the rings before the processional or have Adam's best man do it. Marissa turned to me and said, "What makes you less stressed?" Not what made her more important. Not what was traditional. Not what would look better. What made me less stressed? I chose the best man because he was already standing with Adam. Marissa wrote it down and moved on. That tiny exchange stayed with me because it was the opposite of every conversation I was having with Mom. Mom kept asking where Jenna could be inserted. Marissa kept asking what I wanted removed. 3 days before the wedding, Mom tried one last time. She came to the venue during our final walkthrough, even though I had not asked her to. Dad came too. Jenna arrived halfway through carrying coffee and wearing the kind of expression that suggested she had already been told there was a problem only I could solve. Victor Grant, the venue's security manager, was there briefly because Adam and I had requested clarification about restricted areas and guest access. Nothing dramatic. We had a bridal suite, a groom's room, vendor corridors, and several exterior doors. The venue simply wanted us to know who could go where. Dad seemed unusually interested. "What happens if somebody causes a disruption?" he asked Victor. Victor answered generally. Staff would de-escalate, assess safety, and remove someone if necessary. Dad asked whether family could request that a guest be escorted out. Victor said anyone could report a concern, but venue staff made safety decisions, and the contracting parties controlled guest access unless there was an independent safety issue. I barely registered the exchange. At the time, I thought Dad was asking because one of Adam's cousins had a history of drinking too much at weddings. Dad had heard the story. It made sense that he would ask. Looking back, that moment felt very different. After Victor walked away, Mom waited until the coordinator was discussing lighting with Adam before she pulled me aside. "I have a compromise." I closed my eyes briefly. "About what?" "You know what? If the word Jenna is about to come out of your mouth, this isn't a compromise." Mom ignored that. "Marissa keeps the title. Fine. Nobody is taking that away from her. But during the ceremony, Jenna stands directly beside you." I stared at her. "She is still your sister." "I know who my sister is." "Then why is this such a problem?" "Because I already chose. Marissa can stand right behind her." "No." Mom's face hardened. "Allison, there are people coming who will notice." "Then let them. You are making the family look fractured. The family is not a photograph." That was when Dad joined us. "What's going on?" Mom told him. Dad looked at me with tired disappointment, as though I were making them solve a problem I had created. "Why can't you give your mother this?" "Because it's my wedding party. It's one position for 20 minutes. Then it shouldn't matter so much to you." He exhaled through his nose. "You always do this." "Do what?" "Take something small and turn it into a principle." I had heard versions of that sentence most of my adult life. If I objected to something they wanted, I was making it bigger than necessary. If they objected to something I wanted, it was because family mattered. I looked directly at him. "It became a principle when you stopped taking no for an answer." Jenna had been standing several feet away with her coffee. She finally spoke. "I don't even care that much." I turned toward her. "Then this should be easy." Her expression changed. "I'm just saying Mom's not crazy for thinking it's weird." I didn't say she was crazy. "You're acting like being your sister means nothing." "No, I'm acting like being my sister doesn't automatically make you my maid of honor." She laughed under her breath. "Right." That single word contained years of resentment. Jenna had always believed I thought I was better than her, because I was more careful. I had always believed she resented me because consequences reached me faster than they reached her. We were probably both simplifying the other. But I was not going to solve our entire relationship through a ceremony lineup. I told Mom the subject was closed. Then I walked away. Marissa was standing near the ceremony doors, talking to the coordinator. When she saw my face, she waited until we were alone. "Do I need to know?" "No." "Okay. That's it? If you wanted me to know, you would tell me." I laughed, despite myself. Then I told her. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked, "Do you want to change anything?" "No." "Then don't." Mom would have called that Marissa influencing me. That was the irony. Marissa almost never told me what to do. She gave me room to hear myself. The day before the wedding, Dad texted me one more time. "Your mother is upset. I hope you'll reconsider the ceremony placement before tomorrow. No need for this to become a bigger issue than it is." I read it twice. Then I responded, "Nothing needs to become bigger. Marissa is my maid of honor. Jenna is my sister. Both are already true." Dad did not reply. That night, I checked the lender fraud portal before bed. No major update. The bank statement request was still processing. I looked at the wedding dress hanging in the hotel suite and decided I was done thinking about family logistics for the night. That was one of the last moments I believed the wedding and the loan were two separate problems I could keep in two separate boxes. 3 days later, I would watch my mother take Marissa's bouquet and put it in Jenna's hands. And months later, I would understand that the gesture was not random. It was the purest version of how my parents thought. If Jenna needed something, the first question was not whether it belonged to someone else. The first question was whether that person could afford to lose it. After the wedding, when the lender called me back, I was sitting in the hotel room with my shoes kicked off and my bouquet resting in a water glass because nobody had remembered to bring a vase. Adam was downstairs, speaking with the venue coordinator about the final bill. Marissa had gone home after making me promise I would call if I needed anything. The investigator asked me to verify several pieces of contact information connected to the application. One phone number was mine. One email address was close to mine but wrong by one character. Then she read an alternate recovery contact. I did not recognize the full number immediately. She gave me the last 4 digits. My stomach tightened. I had seen those digits before. "Can you tell me whose number that is?" I asked. "We're still verifying ownership," she said. "I don't want to give you a conclusion before we confirm it. Is it connected to someone I know?" There was a pause. "What I can tell you is that it has appeared in records associated with someone in your family." I stopped breathing for a second. Not because I knew who. Because the possibilities had suddenly become much smaller. The investigator explained that they were also reviewing application access history and identity verification records. She reminded me again not to contact anyone based solely on partial information. I almost smiled at that. 12 days earlier, I had been doing exactly that. Waiting, checking, refusing to accuse without proof. But now my mother had already admitted there was something they intended to pay back before I discovered it. My father had already tried to make me call the whole thing private. And the lender had just told me the application contained contact information tied to my family. I looked at the bouquet in the water glass. 3 days earlier, Dad had accused me of turning small things into principles. By then, I was beginning to understand that consent was only a small thing to him when it belonged to someone else. The morning after my wedding, I woke up before Adam did and lay still for several minutes, listening to the hotel air conditioner hum against the silence. For one strange second, I forgot everything except the fact that I was married. My left hand was resting on top of the blanket, and the ring looked unfamiliar in the early light. Then I remembered my mother's face in the hallway, my father arguing with security, Jenna standing there with Marissa's bouquet, and the sentence Mom had said before she could stop herself. It was supposed to be paid back before you ever had to worry about it. The memory came back whole, and with it came the voicemail from the lender. I got out of bed quietly, took my laptop to the small desk near the window, and opened the fraud portal. I had already decided the night before that I was not going to spend the first morning of my marriage chasing my family through phone calls. That did not mean I was going to ignore the case. There was a difference between refusing to let them consume the day and pretending nothing had happened. I had spent 12 days learning that distinction. I could protect myself without letting them own every hour. The investigator called a little after 8. She confirmed my identity again and walked me through several details from the application. The loan had been opened recently enough that the lender still had a complete electronic record of the process. She could not yet tell me who they believed submitted it, but she said enough pieces did not match my normal account history that they had escalated the review. The authentication pattern did not match the way I had previously interacted with the lender's systems. One of the contact details was not mine. An alternate recovery number was associated with someone connected to my family, though they were still verifying ownership. She asked me again, very clearly, whether I had authorized anyone to apply for a personal loan on my behalf. No. Did you give anyone permission to use your identity information for financing? No. Did you verbally authorize your parents, your sister, or anyone else to act for you? No. She paused long enough that I could hear typing. I need you to state that again for the affidavit. I did. There was something deeply unsettling about reducing betrayal to a series of yes or no questions. Had I applied? No. Had I authorized? No. Had I received the money? No. The questions were clean in a way family arguments never were. There was no room for Mom to say Jenna was struggling. There was no room for Dad to explain that everything would eventually be repaid. There was no room for anyone to decide that my ability to recover changed the meaning of permission. The investigator told me the lender's review of my liability would continue separately from any other action I chose to take. She advised me to preserve communications and avoid deleting emails or texts connected to the situation. She did not tell me to confront anyone. She did not tell me not to. She simply told me what they needed from me. When the call ended, I closed the laptop. Adam was awake by then, propped against the pillows. How bad? He asked. Worse than a clerical mistake. Not enough yet for them to tell me who submitted it. He looked toward the laptop. Do you want to keep going right now? No, I want breakfast. That was one of the healthiest decisions I made that week. We went downstairs, ordered too much food, and spent nearly an hour talking about nothing connected to my parents. We talked about the ceremony, the fact that Adam's uncle had cried harder than anyone expected, the flower girl who had abandoned her basket halfway down the aisle, and how Marissa had somehow managed to keep the reception running despite everything. For that hour, I let the wedding be mine again. Then we went back upstairs, and I checked the bank. The expanded transaction detail had finally posted. I had expected the information to make things simpler. It did the opposite. The loan proceeds had landed in the old joint account shortly after the application was approved. I could see the deposit amount and the date. Within hours, nearly all of it had been transferred out. The destination was not Jenna. It was not even a business account with her company's name. The outgoing transfer went to an account linked to my father. I stared at the transaction detail until the numbers blurred slightly. Adam came over and stood beside me. That's your dad? It looks like it. Does that prove he opened the loan? No. It proved something, but I was trying to be precise even with myself. The money had entered an account Mom controlled. Mom had moved it. It had gone to an account linked to Dad. That showed a chain. It did not yet prove who submitted the application. I took screenshots, downloaded the statement, saved a clean copy to a separate folder, and wrote the dates into the timeline Marissa had helped me start. Then I called the bank. Because I was still listed as a joint owner, they could confirm the transfer and the receiving institution. They could not tell me everything about an external account that was not mine, but they confirmed enough to establish that the money had left our joint account and moved to an account bearing Dad's name. I asked whether Mom initiated the transfer. The representative confirmed the transaction originated through credentials associated with the joint account. She could not tell me which joint owner physically pressed the button without a formal review, but the activity occurred during a session tied to the access profile Mom had been using. That mattered. I wrote it down. Again, not proof of application fraud. Proof of use. Dad called before lunch. I watched his name appear on the screen and almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered, Allison. He sounded exhausted, which irritated me because some part of me still responded to that tone the way I had as a child. Dad tired meant lower your voice. Dad disappointed meant reconsider. Dad worried meant somebody else's emergency was about to become everybody's problem. What do you want? I want to explain. You had yesterday. Yesterday was your wedding. You tried to remove my maid of honor 5 minutes before the ceremony. That is a separate issue. For once, we agreed. Then explain the loan. There was a pause. It was temporary bridge financing. I looked at the statement on my screen. For whom? Jenna's business had a short-term cash flow problem. That still doesn't explain why my name is on the loan. You have strong credit. The answer came so quickly that for a second I thought I had misheard him. I asked why my name is on it, not why my credit was useful. Allison, listen to the whole thing before you react. I'm listening. Jenna had a large obligation coming due. If she missed it, the consequences would have been serious. Your mother and I had money coming from the sale of an investment property, but the timing didn't line up. We needed a bridge. That's all this was. You needed a bridge. Yes. So you used me. That is not what I said. It's what happened. No one was asking you to pay anything. I actually laughed then. Dad, there is a $48,000 debt on my credit report. For now. That sentence is insane. It would have been gone before it affected you in any meaningful way. Meaningful to who? To you. I leaned back in the chair. You don't get to decide what counts as meaningful on my credit. I was trying to protect your sister's business. That still isn't an answer to the question. What question? Did I authorize it? He did not answer. I waited. The silence did more than any explanation could have. Dad, we knew you would have concerns. That is not authorization. We knew you would say no before you understood the circumstances. I stared at the wall. There it was. Not a mistake. Not a misunderstanding. Not even a belief that I had already agreed. He had expected me to refuse. He had simply decided the refusal would be inconvenient. That's why you didn't ask. That's why we planned to repay it before it became your problem. It became my problem the second you used my name. You are reducing this to paperwork. I am reducing it to consent. He sighed. The sound made me angrier than if he had shouted. You're married now. You have a stable household. You and Adam both earn well. Jenna did not have that cushion. And that gives you access to my credit? No one said access. You used it. For a few weeks. You keep changing the unit of measurement like that changes what happened. He was quiet. I looked down at the transaction trail again. Why did the money go through Mom's old account? That account already had your name on it. I closed my eyes. He said it as if that were an explanation. Maybe to him it was. Why did it go from there to your account? I was handling the business obligation. So you knew exactly where the money came from. I knew what we were doing. That was the closest thing to an admission he had given me so far. I wrote the sentence down while he was still talking. He must have heard the pen. Are you taking notes? Yes. Allison, this is exactly the problem. You're treating us like strangers. No. If a stranger did this, I wouldn't be having this conversation. That shut him up for a moment. Then he shifted tactics. I can repay it. With what? The property sale. When? We're finalizing it. That means you don't have the money yet. We will. What if the sale falls through? It won't. What if it takes longer? It won't. What if Jenna's business needs more money next month? That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this. He became colder then. You have always assumed the worst of her. That's not true. You refused to help 3 years ago. I refused to guarantee debt when nobody would show me the numbers. You could afford the risk. That has never been the standard. To you. No, Dad. To reality. I heard him exhale. Then came the sentence he wanted me to say yes to. Call the lender and tell them this was a family misunderstanding. No. Think about what you're doing. I have. This could create consequences far beyond a credit report. Then maybe you should have thought about that before using my identity. You are acting as if I stole $48,000 from you. You borrowed $48,000 in my name without asking me, and planned to repay every cent. Repayment does not create permission retroactively. There was another silence. Finally, he said, "We'll talk when you're calmer." That old line. It had worked when I was 24. It had even worked sometimes when I was 30. By 38, I knew what it meant. He had run out of arguments. I'm calm now, I said. That's why I'm not changing my fraud statement. Then I ended the call. My hands were shaking again, but not because I doubted myself. Because I did not. That was new. Mom called less than 20 minutes later. I almost did not answer because I knew Dad had called her the second we hung up. Then I decided I wanted to hear what version she chose. Allison, honey. Her voice was soft. That was worse. Dad says you won't let him fix this. He can repay the loan if he wants. That doesn't mean I'm telling the lender I authorized it. He is trying to protect Jenna. I know. Her business could collapse. Then she has a business problem. Do you hear yourself? Yes. Your sister could lose everything she has worked for. And your solution was to create debt under my name. We weren't asking you to pay it. You were asking me to carry it without knowing. It was temporary. There was that word again. Temporary had become their favorite moral loophole. If the harm lasted a short enough time, apparently it did not count. If someone took your car without asking and brought it back before you noticed, would you call that permission? This is not a car. No, it's worse. Mom's voice sharpened. You always do this. You take something that could be solved inside the family and turn it into a rule. I almost smiled because Dad had said the same thing about the maid of honor position. Maybe because rules are what stop people from deciding they can use things that aren't theirs. You had options. So did Jenna. She was out of options. No, she was out of options she liked. That's cruel. No, Mom. It's true. She went quiet. Then she said the thing I had been waiting to hear without realizing it. You have Adam. You have savings. You have a good job. Your credit is strong. Even if something went wrong, you would have been fine. The room seemed to shrink. There it was again. You'll be fine. Only now it was not something said to a teenager whose mother had to leave an awards dinner. It was a financial strategy. I pressed my fingers against my forehead. Do you hear what you just said? I'm saying you are more stable. You are saying that because I have built stability, you had more right to risk it. That is not what I mean. It is exactly what you mean. No, I mean Jenna was in a more vulnerable position. So you made me vulnerable instead. We were going to fix it. You keep saying that as if fixing something you broke means you were entitled to break it. Mom started crying then. Not loudly. Just enough that I heard her breathing change. A younger version of me would have softened immediately. Not because I was weak, because Mom's tears had always turned the conversation from what happened into whether she was hurting. I did not rush to fill the silence. Finally, she said, I don't know who you are anymore. That hurt more than I wanted it to. I looked at the wedding ring on my hand. I'm the same person who told you no 3 years ago. You are talking about money like it matters more than family. No. I'm talking about permission like it matters even inside family. You are willing to ruin your father over this. Dad made the decision. And Jenna? I'm not talking about Jenna right now. You know this will destroy her business. Then her business was already in trouble. Mom made a sound of disbelief. I can't talk to you when you're like this. When I'm like what? Cold. I almost laughed. Cold was the word my mother used when I did not rearrange myself around someone else's panic. Then we should stop talking. I ended the call before she could turn my refusal into another accusation. For the rest of the afternoon, I tried not to think about the loan. That lasted maybe 40 minutes. Then my Aunt Diane called. She was Mom's younger sister, and one of the few relatives who usually stayed out of our family arguments. I knew immediately why she was calling. Allison, I heard there was a misunderstanding with some family money. I closed my eyes. That fast. Mom had already started telling the story. What exactly did you hear? That your dad used some short-term financing to help Jenna, and you thought it was fraud. I didn't think it was fraud because it helped Jenna. That's not what I meant. I know. I'm asking what you were told. Diane hesitated. That there was a loan, but you weren't actually expected to pay it. I let the silence sit. Then I said, I did not apply for the loan. Another pause. Did your dad? I'm waiting on the lender to complete that part of the investigation. Your mother said you knew they were helping Jenna. I knew they had helped Jenna before. I did not know they were borrowing in my name. Diane's voice changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Oh. That single word told me Mom had left that part out. I could have sent her the statement. I could have forwarded every screenshot. I could have told her what Mom said at the wedding. I did not. I'm not asking you to take sides, I said. I'm telling you one fact. I did not apply for it. Diane said she understood. Then, after a moment, she asked, Are you okay? The question almost undid me because it was the first one anyone in my family had asked that was not really about Jenna. I'm dealing with it. That isn't what I asked. I looked out the hotel window. I will be. She did not say you'll be fine. She said, okay. That difference mattered more than it should have. Over the next 2 days, the family version spread. A cousin texted Adam asking whether there had been some kind of argument over a loan. An uncle left me a voicemail, saying Dad had always been generous and deserved the chance to make things right. Mom sent me a message, saying she hoped I was proud of how much stress I was causing. I answered none of them. I did not need to win a family vote. I needed evidence. The expanded bank records arrived the following afternoon. This time, the trail went farther. The money moved from the old joint account into Dad's account. From there, most of it went to satisfy a business obligation connected to Jenna's company. It was not a glamorous expense. No designer purchase. No vacation. New secret car. It was a payment tied to the business itself. That almost made it worse because it fit Dad's explanation. He had not borrowed in my name for something frivolous. He had done it because he believed the purpose justified the method. I studied the transaction date. Then I opened my text history with Dad. 3 days after that payment, he had texted me for the first time in months about Jenna's business. Jenna may be dealing with some temporary cash flow pressure. Don't bring it up with her. She's embarrassed. 3 days after, the money had already moved. They had already acted. Then Dad introduced the crisis to me as if it were unfolding in real time. I went back through my notes and lined up the dates. Loan application. Deposit. Transfer. Business payment. Dad's first message to me about Jenna's trouble. The sequence mattered. It meant they had not come to me during an emergency and made a desperate decision after I refused. They had made the decision first. Then they had begun preparing the explanation. I called the lender investigator. I told her I had new transaction records and asked where to upload them. She sent me a secure link. Before we ended the call, I asked whether they had made any progress on the application access history. There was a pause. We have preliminary information. Can you tell me what it is? I can tell you that the access trail does not appear consistent with your normal device history. That I already know. Yes. We also have a contact and network association that may connect the application activity to someone you identified as a family member. My chest tightened. Who? We're still verifying before I give you a formal conclusion. Is it my mother? I don't want to speculate. Is it my father? Another pause. Longer this time. I can tell you that James Pierce is one of the names under review. I gripped the edge of the desk. For all the evidence I already had, hearing his name from someone outside the family changed the shape of the room. Not because it proved everything. Not yet. But because my father had spent 2 days telling me this was bridge financing, a temporary fix, a family misunderstanding. And now the lender was telling me his name was tied to the path of the application itself. What happens next? I asked. We verify the association. We compare the contact and access records. Then we document our finding. I don't want you treating a preliminary link as a final determination. I won't. And I meant it. That was still who I was. Facts first. But when I ended the call, I looked again at the timeline spread across my screen. The money had been moved before Dad ever told me Jenna was in trouble. Mom had already admitted they meant to repay it before I noticed. Dad had asked me to call it a misunderstanding. Now his name was appearing in the application review. For the first time, the question in front of me was no longer whether my parents had crossed a line. It was whether my father had been the one who chose where to cross it. The lender did not give me a formal answer that afternoon, and I did not expect one. I had learned enough by then to understand the difference between a preliminary link and a finding someone was willing to put in writing. Still, once I heard my father's name associated with the application trail, I could not put the possibility back where it had been. For 12 days before the wedding, I had been protecting myself against an unknown person. After the wedding, I had been trying to understand what my parents knew. Now I was waiting to learn whether Dad had gone beyond knowing and actually built the thing that put my name on the debt. He answered that question before the lender did. The email arrived just after 9 the next morning. The subject line was simply, "Please read this before you make things worse." That was Dad. Even when he was asking me not to destroy him, he still needed the sentence to begin with what I was supposedly doing wrong. I almost deleted it unopened. Then I remembered the investigator telling me to preserve communications, so I downloaded a copy before I read it. Dad had written nearly 2,000 words. He started with Jenna. He described her business as something that had been temporarily trapped between obligations and incoming revenue. He said she had several projects moving, clients who owed her money, inventory she could not liquidate without damaging future contracts, and a payment that had come due at exactly the wrong time. According to him, if that payment had not been made, vendors could have stopped extending terms. One important client might have walked, and Jenna's reputation could have collapsed before the underlying cash flow problem corrected itself. He wrote as though he were presenting a business case. No emotion at first. No mention of me, except as a financing source. Then he explained that he and Mom had already committed more of their own money than they had planned. They were in the process of selling an investment property and expected proceeds that would have allowed them to repay the loan quickly. The timing, he said, had been the problem. They needed money for a few weeks. My credit profile made the loan possible on better terms than the alternatives they had been offered. I stopped reading there and went back. My credit profile made the loan possible. Not our family. Not a misunderstanding. My credit. I kept reading. Dad wrote that he knew I would have objected if he asked me in advance because I had already taken a hard position about helping Jenna financially. He said he did not believe that position reflected the actual risk in this situation. He believed that once the property sold and the loan disappeared, I would understand that no permanent harm had been intended. Then came the sentence I saved in a separate screenshot. You were the only person in the family financially strong enough to survive the temporary hit if the timing slipped. I read it 3 times. There it was in his own words. The philosophy I had spent years feeling without ever hearing anyone admit. Jenna was fragile enough to justify the rescue. I was strong enough to justify the risk. Dad had not chosen me because I was the easiest target. He had chosen me because he believed I could take the damage. A few paragraphs later, he made another mistake. I handled the paperwork because I knew involving you directly would turn a short-term financing problem into a family argument before we had a chance to solve it. I stopped again. Handled the paperwork. I had never accused him in writing of submitting the application. The lender had not yet given me a formal conclusion. Dad had just volunteered language that placed him inside the process. He went on to insist that he had never intended for me to make a payment, never intended to damage my credit, never intended to leave the debt in my name long term. He said intention mattered. He said outcome mattered. He said a reasonable daughter should consider both before allowing outsiders to turn a family decision into a legal matter. The last paragraph was the most revealing. If you keep treating this as fraud instead of a temporary family solution, you will create consequences that cannot be taken back even after the money is repaid. I am asking you to think about whether that is really what you want. I printed the email, not because I needed paper, because I wanted to look at it without seeing Dad's name glowing on a screen. Adam found me at the dining table with the pages spread in front of me. He wrote all of that? Yes. Does he realize what he admitted? I don't think he thinks he admitted anything. That was the strange part. Dad believed the email helped him. He believed proving he had a plan to repay made his decision reasonable. He believed the absence of intended permanent loss mattered more than the absence of permission. He was not trying to confess. He was trying to persuade me. Adam sat across from me, but did not touch the pages. What are you going to do? Send it to the investigator. Anything else? I'm waiting for their formal finding. He nodded. I looked down at the line about being strong enough to survive the temporary hit. Do you know what bothers me most? What? He thinks that's a compliment. Adam did not answer immediately. Then he said, I think he thinks it's proof he trusted you. That was exactly it. Dad would have called it confidence in me. He had always admired that I recovered quickly, planned ahead, kept savings, paid bills early, asked uncomfortable questions. Somewhere along the way, admiration had turned into entitlement. If Allison can handle more, give Allison more. If Allison can recover, risk Allison. If Allison can say no, find a way to solve the problem before she has the chance. I uploaded the email through the lender's secure portal. Then I went to work. That probably sounds anticlimactic, but by then I had decided I was not going to live inside the case every hour. I had already learned how easily family emergencies expanded until they filled whatever space I gave them. I answered the lender. I preserved evidence. Then I did my job, made dinner, returned wedding gifts, and built routines around a problem that was no longer small enough to ignore, but still did not deserve my entire life. The formal call came 2 days later. The investigator asked me to confirm I was somewhere private. I shut my office door. "We've completed enough of the access review to document several findings," she said. My hand tightened around the pen I was holding. She explained that the electronic application had not followed the same authentication pattern associated with my verified activity. The application included recovery and contact information I did not recognize as mine. One of those points had now been verified as associated with my father. Then, she told me the access trail itself contained a connection to James. She kept the explanation general, and so did I afterward. There was no reason for me to know the technical mechanics of how he had gotten through every verification step. What mattered was what the lender had preserved: contact and access records tied to Dad, along with an authorization submitted under my name that did not match my legitimate activity. Are you saying my father submitted it? I'm saying the evidence we have connects his contact information and access activity directly to the application process. Our fraud unit considers that material. Is there any indication I authorized him? None that we've found. I closed my eyes. Even after everything Mom had said, everything Dad had written, and everything the bank trail showed, some stupid part of me had still been waiting for a technical explanation that separated him from the application itself. A compromised account. A mistake. Someone else using his information. Something. The investigator continued. We're adding your father's email to the file. His statement that he handled the paperwork is consistent with the direction of the evidence, but I want to be clear that our finding is based on the application records, not only on his email. That distinction mattered to me. I did not want Dad convicted in my own mind because he had used an unfortunate phrase. I wanted facts. Now I had them. What happens to the loan? Our liability review is still ongoing. That process is separate. We're also going to need your formal affidavit maintained in the file, and we may ask for additional documentation. Should I file a police report? She paused. We don't tell customers what legal action to take, but when someone reports identity-related fraud, a police report can become part of the documentation, especially if the evidence points to a known individual. If you choose to file one, keep the report number and provide it to us. That was all I needed. After we ended the call, I stayed in my office for a long time. The room was quiet enough that I could hear people walking past in the hallway outside. I remembered sitting at my parents' dining table when I was 17. Dad had a bank statement in front of us and a pen in his hand. Never sign anything you haven't read. At the time, he had made financial responsibility sound like a form of self-respect. Read before you sign. Know what you owe. Understand what someone is asking you to guarantee. Do not let embarrassment stop you from asking questions. He had taught me the vocabulary I was now using against him. That was harder to absorb than if he had always been reckless. I could have dismissed a reckless father, but Dad knew better. He had taught me better. That meant this had not happened because he misunderstood consent. It happened because he understood it and decided his emergency outranked mine. I left work early. I did not go to the police station immediately. I went home first and pulled everything together. The lender case number, my fraud affidavit, the credit alert, the old joint account statement, the transaction trail, Dad's email, the notes from Mom's admission at the wedding, and my calls with both of them. I printed some things and saved digital copies of others. Then I sat in the car for 5 minutes before driving anywhere. Not because I was reconsidering whether what Dad did was wrong. I was thinking about what came next. My parents had raised me to understand institutions in a strange way. They distrusted outsiders when outsiders had authority over the family, but they loved rules when rules protected them. Dad would argue a contract down to the comma if a vendor charged him something he had not agreed to. Mom would call a manager if a company changed a reservation without permission. I could already hear them saying I was taking things too far. That filing a police report was different. That this belonged inside the family? And for the first time, I asked myself why. Why was fraud less serious because I knew the person? Why did Dad get more privacy because he had watched me grow up? Why did family status change the standard for my consent? It did not. So I filed the report. Nothing cinematic happened. No one rushed out to arrest my father. No detective promised me justice before dinner. I explained the situation, provided the documentation I had, answered questions, and received a report number. I was told the matter would be reviewed and that additional evidence could be requested. I gave the officer the lender's fraud contact information and made sure I understood how to supplement the report later. Then I walked back to my car. The entire thing took less time than one of my mother's wedding planning calls. I sat behind the wheel and felt sick. There was no victory in that moment. Dad was still Dad. That was what people misunderstand when they think boundaries are satisfying from the beginning. Sometimes the right decision feels terrible because it is right about someone you wish had been different. My phone rang before I started the engine. Mom. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. Allison. She sounded tired. What happened? You'll need to be more specific. Your father says the lender called him. I looked through the windshield. I don't know what communication they've had with him. Did you give them his email? Yes. Why? Because he sent it to me about the loan. He was trying to explain. I know. You're using his own attempt to make peace against him. He wrote that he handled the paperwork because he knew I would object. That isn't what he meant. It is exactly what he wrote. Mom breathed hard into the phone. Your father is not a criminal. I didn't call to assign labels. You filed something, didn't you? I did not answer immediately. She knew me too well. Allison. I filed a police report today. For several seconds, there was nothing. Then Mom whispered, "Oh my God." It was the first time since the wedding I heard genuine fear in her voice. Not anger. Not outrage. Fear. You reported your father to the police. I reported a loan opened in my name without my permission. The lender's evidence connects Dad directly to the application. You could have waited. For what? For him to fix it. How? Sell the property. Repay the loan. Make you whole. Making me whole financially doesn't erase what happened. You haven't lost anything. I lost the ability to trust my own parents with my identity. That is so dramatic. No, dramatic was removing my maid of honor 5 minutes before my ceremony. This is documentation. Mom started crying. I did not interrupt. Eventually she said, I was afraid. That was new. Of what? That Jenna would lose everything. Her voice had changed. No performance. No practiced argument. She called your father because one of the business payments was coming due. There were vendors, a lease, people expecting money. Your father had already put in so much. We had already put in so much. He said if we could get her through a few weeks, the property sale would solve it. Why didn't you tell me? You would have said no. Yes, I know. The honesty of those 2 words hurt. I leaned back in the seat. Then why do you keep calling this a misunderstanding? I don't know what else to call it. Something you did knowing I would refuse. She was quiet. Then she said, You were always the one I didn't worry about. I closed my eyes. There was no manipulation in the sentence at first. Only something sad and true. When you were kids, Jenna worried me constantly. She was impulsive. Emotional. If something went wrong, she fell apart. You would get angry, but then you would figure things out. You always did. I listened. You went away to college and handled it. You got your own apartment, you built a career. Even when you were furious with us, I knew you were okay. That didn't mean I needed less from you. I didn't say that. You lived like it. Allison, you just told me you didn't worry about me. Do you know what it feels like to be the child people don't worry about? It means when there is one chair left. Jenna gets it because I can stand. When there is one problem too many, mine waits because I can handle it. And apparently when there is one person whose credit can absorb a loan, it's mine because I'll recover. I never wanted you to feel that way. That does not change what you did. Mom cried quietly. For a few seconds, I let myself feel sorry for her. I still do sometimes. because I believe she loved me. That was part of what made the damage so complicated. She loved me and still participated. Love had not automatically made her respectful. Fear for Jenna had not automatically made her helpless. Mom had choices too. "I'm sorry you felt like we expected too much from you," she said. It was almost an apology. Almost. Then she ruined it. "But if there is any part of you that understands why we panicked, help us fix this before it goes further." I stared at the steering wheel. There it was. The door opened, and behind it was the same room. She had told me one true thing. Then she used the truth to ask me to rescue them. What does "help us fix this" mean? Tell the lender you don't want them pursuing your father. Tell whoever you spoke to that the money is being repaid. I cannot tell them I authorized something I did not authorize. You don't have to lie. What exactly would I say? That you don't want this treated like some stranger stole from you. A stranger did not steal from me. My father used my identity without my permission. I'm not sure why that is supposed to make it less serious. Because he is your father. That explains why it hurts more. It doesn't make it less true. Mom's voice hardened again. So that's it? What does that mean? You're going to let the system decide what happens to your own father? No. Dad decided what he did. The lender will decide what it does with the loan. The police will decide what they do with the report. I am only refusing to change the facts. You know how cold that sounds? Yes. That answer stopped her. I continued before she could. You call me cold whenever I don't take responsibility for somebody else's panic. I'm done measuring whether a decision is right by whether you're comfortable with it. She did not say anything. I have to go. Allison. I waited. I do love you. I swallowed. I know. And I meant that too. Then I ended the call. The worst part of that conversation was that Mom had finally given me something I had wanted for years. An explanation. You were always the one I didn't worry about. It connected so much. The missed things. The expectations. The endless assumption that my disappointment was cheaper than Jenna's. But explanation was not absolution. Understanding why someone crossed your boundary does not require you to move the boundary afterward. That evening, I uploaded the police report number to the lender. Then I opened a folder I had not looked at in years. I was searching for the email from the lunch Dad and I had 3 years earlier, the one where he asked me to co-sign for Jenna's business. It took longer than I expected, because the subject line was generic. When I finally found it, I read my own words and felt something settle inside me. I had been painfully clear. I would not co-sign. I would not guarantee business debt. I would not authorize my name or credit to be used for financing connected to Jenna. I had written it because Dad kept treating my no as an invitation to revisit the conversation. At the time, writing it had felt almost excessive. Now it felt prophetic. I forwarded the email through the secure lender portal with a short note explaining the context. I also uploaded it as supplemental information to the police report. The lender investigator called the next afternoon. I want to make an important distinction, she said. This email does not by itself prove you did not authorize a different transaction 3 years later. I understand. But it is relevant because it contradicts any suggestion that your family had a standing understanding that your credit could be used for your sister's business. That's exactly why I sent it. Good. She told me the present application records remained the primary evidence. Dad's contact information and access association mattered more. His email helped establish knowledge. The old email helped establish context. I appreciated the precision. I was beginning to understand that evidence was strongest when each piece did one job instead of trying to prove everything. The same was true of people. Dad's email told me how he justified himself. Mom's admission told me she knew enough to expect repayment before I noticed. The lender records tied Dad directly to the application process. The bank trail showed where the money moved. None of those pieces alone were the whole story. Together, they were becoming difficult to explain away. Dad did not call me after I filed the report. For 3 days, there was nothing from him. Mom sent one message asking whether I had anything else planned. I did not answer. Diane checked on me once. Marissa asked if I wanted dinner and accepted no when I said I wanted a quiet night. Adam and I unpacked wedding gifts. Life continued in ways that almost felt insulting. There should have been some visible sign that my relationship with my parents had changed permanently. There was not. The grocery store was still open. My inbox still filled. Laundry still needed folding. I think that ordinary rhythm saved me. It reminded me there was a world beyond the Pierce family. On the fourth night, Jenna texted, I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. Her message was longer than usual. I know you think I was part of all of this. I wasn't. Dad handled the financing. Mom barely understood half of it. I didn't apply for anything in your name, and I didn't ask them to do that. I have screenshots if you want proof. I stared at the screen. For the first time since the wedding, Jenna was not asking me to forgive anyone. She was trying to separate herself from them. A second message appeared. I'm sending the thread. Read it yourself. Then the screenshots started arriving. There were 9 of them. I opened the first. At first glance, Jenna seemed to be telling the truth. Dad was clearly the one directing the financial decisions. Dad was clearly the one saying he had handled the immediate problem. Dad was clearly controlling what information went where. I reached the third screenshot and felt some of my certainty about Jenna's shift. Then I reached the 6th. Dad had written, do not bring any of this up with Allison until after the wedding. Mom had responded that I already had enough stress. And beneath that was Jenna's reply, fine, just make sure this doesn't blow up before Saturday. I read the line twice. Then I went back and read the messages above it more carefully. Jenna had not known every detail. I could see that, but she had known there was something involving me. She had known I had not been told. And instead of asking why, she had worried about timing. My wedding was not the moment she wanted me to discover it. Not because she wanted to protect me, because she did not want the consequences arriving before Saturday. I saved every screenshot. Then I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in my hand and realized my father was not the only person whose definition of innocence was about to become much narrower. Jenna's screenshots sat on my phone for almost an hour before I answered her. I did not want to react to the one line that had already lodged itself under my skin and ignore everything around it. That would have been easy. It also would have been exactly what I had spent the last month refusing to do. Facts first, context first, then judgment. I opened the screenshots again and read them from the beginning. The thread had started several days before the wedding. Dad was talking about Jenna's business, a payment deadline, and what he called the bridge. Mom asked whether the transfer had gone through. Jenna asked whether the vendor had been paid. Dad said yes. A few messages later, there was a reference to using Allison's side for the temporary gap. That phrase stopped me. Not, Allison agreed. Not, Allison knows. Not even the old account. Using Allison's side, Jenna replied. As long as this doesn't affect her wedding week. I stared at that message longer than I should have. It was possible, if I wanted to be generous, that she had believed Dad was using money from an account, somehow connected to me, but still legitimately controlled by my parents. It was possible she thought they were moving their own money through an old account. It was possible she had not understood the loan structure at all. Then the thread continued. Mom wrote, she'll be furious if she starts asking questions now. Dad answered, she doesn't need to know until this is cleaned up. Jenna replied, then don't bring any of it up with Allison until after the wedding. There it was again. Not confusion. Not surprise. Management. The next screenshot was the one I had seen the night before. Dad, do not bring any of this up with Allison until after the wedding. Mom, she already has enough stress. Jenna, fine, just make sure this doesn't blow up before Saturday. That sentence was not proof that Jenna knew Dad had opened a fraudulent loan in my name. I was not going to turn it into something it was not. But it proved something else. She knew there was a financial arrangement involving me. She knew I had not been told. She knew I would be angry if I found out. And her concern was not whether I had consented. Her concern was timing. That mattered. I copied the entire thread into a folder, took screenshots of the message details where they were available, and sent the originals to myself so I had an unedited version. Then I texted Jenna. I read everything. She answered almost immediately. Then you can see Dad was the one handling it. That's not the only thing I can see. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, came back. What is that supposed to mean? I called her. She answered on the second ring. Allison. Her voice already had that defensive edge I knew too well, the one that appeared before I had even accused her of anything. I want to ask you one question. Okay. When Dad wrote, "Don't bring any of this up with Allison until after the wedding," what did you think this was? There was a pause. I told you. I thought it was financing stuff. That's not specific. I didn't know the details. I'm not asking what you didn't know. I'm asking what you thought you did know. She exhaled sharply. I thought Mom and Dad had worked something out to cover the business payment. Using what? I don't know. Yenna. I really don't know. You told Mom, as long as this doesn't affect her wedding week. Why would it affect my wedding week? Another pause. Because you get stressed when family money gets involved. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. Family money. That's what I thought it was. Then why did Dad need to hide it from me? He didn't say hide. He said don't tell me. That is not the same thing. I sat down at the kitchen table because I could feel the conversation shifting into the kind of argument our family had perfected. Change one word, soften one verb, and suddenly the thing itself was supposed to look different. He said I didn't need to know until it was cleaned up. That could mean anything. No, it means he knew I didn't know. Jenna said nothing. I continued. You wrote, "Just make sure this doesn't blow up before Saturday." Why would it blow up? I don't know. You keep saying that. Because I didn't know everything. Then what did you think was dangerous enough to blow up? Her voice rose. You're trying to trap me. No, I'm asking you to explain your own words. I knew Dad was doing something financial. I knew you would probably be mad if you found out. That does not mean I knew he took out a loan in your name. I agree. She went quiet. I think she had expected me to accuse her of the whole thing. My answer unsettled her more than shouting would have. You agree? Yes. I don't think you submitted the application. Then why are we having this conversation? Because not submitting it does not make every other choice disappear. That makes no sense. It makes perfect sense. Dad may have created the loan. You still knew there was something involving me that I hadn't been told. And you chose not to ask what it was. I trusted Dad. That's convenient. Her voice sharpened. Do you hear yourself? Yes. You're acting like I was supposed to audit my parents every time they helped me. No. I'm saying when Dad tells you not to mention something to me, and you know I'll be angry if I discover it, there is a point where not asking stops being innocent. That is ridiculous. Is it? Yes. He told me he handled the problem. Mom told me they had a plan. What was I supposed to do? Interrogate them. If their plan involved me, yes. You don't understand what it was like. I leaned back in the chair. Then explain it. For a few seconds, Jenna did not answer. When she finally did, her voice had changed. Less angry. More tired. The business was collapsing. I said nothing. I had a vendor threatening to stop deliveries. The studio lease was behind. One client delayed payment and another cut the project in half after I had already ordered materials. Dad said he had it covered. He told me not to panic. So you didn't. I was already panicking. Then you let him solve it. What was I supposed to do? There were choices. Like what? Close the business? If the business could not pay its obligations, maybe. She made a disbelieving sound. That is so easy for you to say. There it was. The conversation underneath the conversation. It's not easy. It is for you. You always have another option. That's not true. You have a salary. You have savings. You have Adam. If something goes wrong, you have room. And that means what? It means you don't understand what it feels like when there is no room. I waited. She kept going. If my business failed, I lost everything I had spent years building. My studio, my clients, my reputation. I wasn't sitting on some giant emergency fund. So Dad used mine. I didn't say that. You just did. No, I said you had room to recover. I closed my eyes for a second. It was the same argument. Dad had said I was strong enough to survive the temporary hit. Mom had said I had Adam in savings and would have been fine. Now Jenna was telling me I had room to recover. 3 people. 3 versions of the same sentence. Do you know what all of you keep doing? I asked. What? You keep measuring how wrong something is by how much damage you think I can absorb. That isn't fair. It's exactly what you just said. I'm saying our situations were different. They were. That still does not give anyone permission to put debt in my name. I didn't do that. No. Dad did. Then go after him. The words came out fast. Too fast. I let the silence sit. Is that what you want? I want you to stop treating me like I'm part of the crime. I'm not treating you like Dad. It feels like it. Then listen carefully. I do not think you created the loan. I do not think you submitted the application. I am not telling the lender or the police that you did something I cannot prove. She was silent. But I also will not pretend you knew nothing. I didn't know he used your identity. I believe you. Another silence. You do? Yes. Then what do you want from me? That's the problem, Jenna. You still think this is about what I want you to give me. What else would it be? Whether you can admit what you actually did. I didn't do anything. You chose not to ask. That's not a crime. I didn't say it was. Then stop talking like it is. I'm talking about responsibility, not charges. She sighed. Allison, I am exhausted. Suenai. I lost the wedding. Mom and Dad missed the ceremony. Dad is dealing with the lender. Mom is crying every day. The business is barely functioning. How much more do you want? I felt something inside me settle. There was a time when that list would have worked on me. Not because it was false. Because every item invited me to calculate whether I could make someone else hurt less. I did not calculate. I don't want anything more from you. That doesn't sound true. It is. Then what happens now? That depends on you. Meaning? Meaning I'm not financing you, fixing the business, changing my fraud statement, or lying about what I know. Beyond that, your life is yours. She was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, You really are done with us. I looked at the wedding photo still sitting unopened in a preview email on my laptop. No. I'm done being assigned the cost. She hung up. I did not call back. The next morning, Mom sent a group text to me. Dad, Jenna, Adam, Aunt Diane, Uncle Robert, 2 cousins, and Grandma Elise. That alone told me what she was trying to do. Things have gone too far. This family needs to sit down together before outsiders do permanent damage. Sunday at 4. Please come with open hearts. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Adam looked up from his coffee. What? I handed him the phone. He read the message and raised an eyebrow. Outsiders. That's the lender. The police. Probably Marissa too. Are you going? I don't know. He gave me back the phone. You don't have to. I know. I looked at the names in the group. Grandma Elise had not called me once since the wedding. Neither had Uncle Robert. Diane had checked on me, but she had stayed careful. My cousins had only heard fragments. Mom had spent weeks complaining that I was making a private matter public. Now she was organizing an audience. That was not contradiction. It was strategy. Private mattered only when privacy protected them. Once privacy stopped working, family pressure became useful. Dad texted separately 10 minutes later. You should come. This is getting out of control. I replied. What exactly is out of control? The lender. The police report. What relatives are hearing. Those are 3 different things. They are all consequences of one decision. Yours. He did not answer for several minutes. Then, this is why we need everyone in one room. I stared at the message. He still believed the room was his advantage. A room full of family had always worked in my parents' favor. Mom was good at emotional framing. Dad was good at sounding calm after everyone else became upset. Jenna was good at looking overwhelmed at exactly the moment someone expected accountability from her. I was good at leaving before I said something I regretted. Maybe that was what they were counting on. I called Marissa. She answered with, Please tell me this is not another wedding emergency. My mother called a family intervention. That sounds worse. I read her the text. Marissa was quiet. They're trying to pressure you. I know. Do you want to go? I'm deciding. What would going accomplish? That depends. On what? Whether I go there to convince them or to stop letting them rewrite what happened. There was a pause. That sounds like two very different meetings. It is. Marissa did not say go. She did not say do not go. She asked, if nobody in that room changes their mind, would you still be glad you went? I thought about it. Yes? Then you already know. I smiled despite myself. Sometimes I hate how reasonable you are. You called the wrong friend if you wanted gasoline. I called exactly the right one. After we hung up, I opened the folder where I had been keeping everything. The temptation was to bring all of it. The credit alert, the old joint account, the lender notes, Dad's email, the police report, the application findings, the group thread, every text Mom had sent, every bank transaction. That would have been a mistake. If I walked in with 50 pages, Dad would argue details. Mom would say I was building a case against my family. Jenna would claim I was trying to humiliate her. The point was not to bury them in evidence. The point was to make lying difficult. I started with the email from 3 years earlier, the one where I told all 3 of them I would not co-sign, guarantee, borrow, pledge my credit, or authorize my name for Jenna's business debt. That was the first document. Not because it proved the current fraud. It did not. It proved something simpler. There had never been a standing family understanding that they could use my credit for Jenna. The second document was the transaction trail. Loan deposit into the old joint account. Transfer out. Dad's account. Business obligation. Dates. No interpretation needed. The third was Dad's long email. The one where he wrote that I was the only person financially strong enough to survive the temporary hit. That was the document I thought would matter most in the room. Not legally. Emotionally. Dad could explain banking. He could explain repayment. He could explain why Jenna's company needed money. He could not explain away his own belief that my strength gave him greater permission to risk me. I printed those 3 things. Then I opened Jenna's screenshots. I did not print them. Not yet. She had not submitted the application. I was not interested in turning the meeting into a trial of every ugly thought she had expressed. But I saved the thread on my phone because I knew my father. If he saw the room shifting, he would protect Jenna. Not necessarily because he thought she was innocent. Because protecting her was the thing he knew how to do. And if he told everyone she had known absolutely nothing, I would have the truth in my hand. Adam came into the room while I was stacking the pages. 3? 3. You sure? Yes. He picked up the first page, read enough to recognize it, then set it down. Are you asking me to come? No. He looked at me. I smiled faintly. That sounded harsher than I meant it. I know. I want to do this myself. I figured. Is that okay? It's your family. That answer mattered. Not because he did not care, because he did not treat support like ownership. He kissed my forehead and asked whether I wanted him nearby afterward. Yes. Done. Sunday came faster than I expected. I spent the morning doing ordinary things on purpose. Laundry. Grocery shopping. Answering 2 work emails. I did not rehearse a speech because I did not want one. By 3:30, the 3 documents were in a plain folder on the passenger seat beside me. I drove to my parents' house alone. The neighborhood looked exactly the same. That annoyed me. Some part of me expected the outside world to reflect the fact that everything inside that house had changed. Instead, sprinklers clicked across lawns. A dog barked behind a fence. Someone 3 houses down was washing a car. I parked at the curb. Before I got out, I checked my phone. 1 message from Adam. Call when you're done. 1 from Marissa. Whatever they say, you don't owe the room a performance. I put the phone in my purse. Then I looked at the folder. 3 documents. That was all. I had spent weeks gathering evidence because I needed to know what was true. My parents were about to discover I did not need every truth at once. I only needed enough to make their version impossible. I knew my mother had invited more people than the group text suggested the moment I pulled into the driveway and saw cars lining both sides of the street. Aunt Diane's sedan was there, Uncle Robert's truck, my cousin Emily's SUV. Grandma Elise's old Buick was parked closest to the house, which meant someone had probably driven her because she hated backing out of crowded driveways. Dad's car was in the garage. Jenna's was in front. For a family that had spent the last several weeks accusing me of making a private matter public, They had assembled an impressive audience. I sat in my car for another few seconds, with the folder in my lap. 3 documents. That was still the plan. I did not need to convince every person inside that house to like me. I did not need them to understand every legal detail. I did not need anyone to vote on whether I had been wronged. I only needed to stop my parents from using the room as another tool. When I walked in, Mom was arranging plates of food on the dining room table as if this were a holiday gathering instead of an intervention. She had put out coffee, iced tea, cheese, crackers, a bowl of grapes, and one of the bakery cakes she always bought when she wanted a room to feel civilized. That detail irritated me more than it should have. Mom believed presentation could change the nature of almost anything. A family argument became a discussion if there were napkins. A demand became concern if she lowered her voice. A betrayal became a misunderstanding if everyone sat around the same table. She looked at me, then at the folder in my hand. You brought paperwork. I brought facts. Her mouth tightened. Everyone is here because we care about you. I looked into the living room. Dad was standing near the fireplace talking to Uncle Robert. Jenna was on the couch beside Emily. Grandma Elise sat in her usual chair near the window. Aunt Diane gave me a small nod when she saw me. Nobody looked relaxed. Good, I said. Then this should be easy. Mom lowered her voice. Please don't come in here looking for a fight. I'm not. That folder says otherwise. The group text says otherwise. She stared at me. For a second, I saw something close to embarrassment. Then Dad noticed me. Allison. The room quieted. He crossed toward me with that same controlled expression he had worn when he tried to talk security into removing Marissa. Thank you for coming. You asked me to. We needed to sit down as a family. I glanced around the room. With an audience. They're not an audience. What are they? People who love us. I nodded. Then let's not waste their time. Mom looked like she wanted to say something else, but Dad gestured toward the dining room. We sat. I chose the chair closest to the end of the table. Not because I planned to leave dramatically. Because I wanted to be able to. Dad sat opposite me. Mom took the chair beside him. Jenna sat on Mom's other side. Grandma Elise remained in the living room doorway where she could see everyone without joining the table. Aunt Diane sat near me. Uncle Robert and the cousins filled the remaining chairs. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Dad folded his hands. I want to start by saying none of us wanted things to get this far. I almost interrupted. I did not. He continued. There was a business crisis involving Jenna. Sharon and I made a temporary financial decision to prevent that crisis from becoming permanent. We had a property sale in progress. We expected to repay everything quickly. Allison discovered the loan before we had a chance to explain, and since then, this has escalated beyond what any of us intended. That was good. Calm. Reasonable. Almost elegant. He had left out the one fact that made every other fact matter. I had not consented. Uncle Robert leaned back in his chair. So the money was going to be paid back? Yes. Dad looked at me briefly, then back at Robert. The intention was always full repayment. Allison was never expected to lose $48,000. My cousin Emily frowned. Then what's the issue? Aunt Diane glanced at me. I said nothing yet. Dad answered for me. The issue is that Allison did not know in advance that her name was used. There it was. Softened again. Not fraud. Not unauthorized loan. Her name was used. Mom jumped in. And she understandably felt blindsided. Understandably. That word was new. Dad continued. She opened a fraud dispute. Then filed a police report. Now the lender is treating this as something much more serious than a private family decision. I looked at him. You mean more serious than you wanted it treated? His face tightened. I mean more serious than the actual outcome justifies. What actual outcome? You haven't lost the money. I have never said the problem was whether I personally made a payment. Then what do you want? That question came from Jenna. She had been quiet until then. What exactly do you want, Allison? Dad can repay it. The business is barely surviving. Mom is sick over this. What is supposed to happen before you're satisfied? I looked at her. I don't need anything to happen before I'm satisfied. That's not an answer. It is. I didn't call this meeting. Mom leaned forward. We called it because everyone is hearing different versions. Yes. And because your father deserves a chance to explain. He has explained. Several times. Dad shook his head. You haven't listened. I listened to your phone call. I read your email. I read the lender's findings. I'm not confused about your explanation. You keep using the lender like they know this family. They don't need to know this family. That is exactly the problem. No, that is exactly why the process is useful. Grandma Elise spoke from the doorway. What does that mean? I turned toward her. It means the lender only cares whether I authorize the loan. They don't care whether Jenna was scared. They don't care whether Dad planned to repay it. They don't care whether Mom thought I could recover. They ask one question. Grandma nodded slowly. Did you authorize it? No. The room went quiet. Dad's jaw tightened. That is an oversimplification. No, it's the simplest part. Uncle Robert looked at Dad. Did she say yes at any point? Dad did not answer immediately. Mom stepped in. She had refused to help Jenna before, but this situation was different. I reached for the folder. That was the first document. I slid the printed email across the table. This is from 3 years ago. Dad's face changed the moment he saw the subject line. Mom looked down. Jenna did not reach for it. Aunt Diane pulled the page closer. I said, Dad asked me to co-sign for Jenna's business. I refused in writing because they kept asking after I said no verbally. I wrote that I would not co-sign, guarantee, borrow, pledge my credit, or authorize my name to be used for debt connected to Jenna's business. Emily read over Diane's shoulder. Dad spoke before anyone else could. That was 3 years ago. Yes. A different situation. Yes. Then why are you presenting it like it proves anything? It does not prove the current fraud. The lender has current records for that. He flinched at the word. This proves there was no standing understanding that you could use my credit for Jenna. Mom pressed her lips together. I continued. You've both told relatives this was a family financing arrangement. That phrase suggests some kind of shared permission. There wasn't. Uncle Robert looked at Dad again. Did you ask her this time? Dad stared at the table. No. The room changed slightly. Not dramatically. Nobody gasped. Nobody stood up. But the tone moved. That was all I needed. Dad must have felt it too. He leaned forward. Because there was no time. I pulled out the second document. The transaction trail. I placed it in front of him. There was enough time to submit a loan application. There was enough time for the money to hit the joint account. There was enough time for Mom to transfer it. There was enough time for it to move through your account and pay Jenna's business obligation. Then 3 days later, you texted me for the first time saying Jenna might be having cash flow trouble. Uncle Robert looked at the dates. 3 days later? Yes. Dad said. That doesn't mean what you think it means. What does it mean? We were trying to solve the crisis before dragging you into it. I almost smiled. That sentence is the whole problem. Mom rubbed her forehead. Allison, please. No, you wanted everyone involved. Let them hear it. Her eyes flashed. I did not invite everyone so you could humiliate us. You invited everyone because you thought they would pressure me. That is not true. Then what did you think would happen? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Aunt Diane looked at her sister. Sharon. Mom turned toward her. Diane's voice was quiet. You told me Allison misunderstood a short-term family loan. She did. No. Diane shook her head. You left out that she never agreed. Mom's face tightened. I told you she didn't know yet. That's not the same thing. It was going to be repaid. Grandma Elise spoke again. Then why didn't you ask her? Mom looked toward her. Because she would have said no. Grandma did not respond. She did not need to. The silence after Mom's answer was stronger than any accusation I could have made. Jenna shifted in her chair. Can we stop pretending this was some plot to hurt Allison? I looked at her. I don't think the goal was to hurt me. Then why are you acting like it was? Because intention is not the only thing that matters. You know Dad was trying to save my business. I know. You know they thought they could pay it back. I know. You know you were in a better financial position than any of us. There it was again. Before I could answer, Uncle Robert frowned. What does her financial position have to do with whether she agreed? Jenna looked at him. I'm saying she wasn't going to lose her house over this. That is not the standard, I said. She threw up her hands. You keep saying that like people are robots. Families make decisions for each other, not debt decisions in someone else's name. Mom's voice broke in. Family comes first sometimes. The room froze. I did not expect her to say it. Maybe she did not realize she had. Maybe the sentence had become so automatic she no longer heard it. But I did. So did Aunt Diane. So did Jenna. Dad closed his eyes briefly. Mom looked around the room as if she had only just heard herself. I said, "That is what you said at my wedding?" Her face hardened. "This is not about the wedding. It is the same rule." "No, it isn't. You decided Jenna should have Marissa's position because she was family. You decided Jenna should have access to my credit because she needed it more. Different object. Same rule. That is ridiculous." "No, it's consistent." Dad cut in. "Now you're trying to turn a wedding disagreement into evidence." "No, I'm telling you why I stopped believing these were isolated misunderstandings." Emily looked confused. "What happened at the wedding?" Mom answered quickly. "Marissa caused an incident." I looked at her. "That is not what happened." She argued with Jenna. Then Dad reported a safety issue and tried to have security remove her from the ceremony. Mom took Marissa's bouquet and gave it to Jenna. I reversed it because Adam and I were the contracting parties. Jenna snapped. "You had all three of us escorted out." "Yes." "Your own parents." "Yes." "Over a bouquet." "No." "Over refusing to accept a boundary after months of being told no." Uncle Robert looked at Dad. "You called security on the maid of honor?" Dad's voice became clipped. She became confrontational. "She asked Jenna to stop going through Allison's things," I said. Dad glared at me. "You were not there for the beginning." "No, Victor was. And he found no independent reason to keep Marissa out." Mom looked toward Grandma Elise. "This is exactly what I mean. She is rewriting everything to make us look monstrous." Grandma's expression did not change. "I haven't heard Allison call you monsters." Mom went still. Grandma continued. "I've heard her say you didn't ask." The room fell silent again. That was the first moment I saw genuine panic in Mom's face. Not because Grandma had yelled, because she had not. Mom was good at surviving accusation. She was less prepared for people calmly refusing her framing. Dad reached for the transaction sheet. "This proves money moved." "It does not prove Allison suffered a loss." I nodded. "You're right." He looked almost surprised. "That is why I brought the third document." I took his email from the folder. I did not slide the whole thing around the table. I read one sentence. "You were the only person in the family financially strong enough to survive the temporary hit if the timing slipped." Nobody moved. I looked at Dad. "You wrote that." His face went red. "It was private. You sent it to the person whose identity you used. It was an attempt to explain." "I know." I looked around the table. He did not believe I had consented. He knew I would object. He believed the risk was acceptable because I could recover if something went wrong. Dad leaned forward. "You are twisting that." "How?" "I was saying you were stable. You were saying my stability made me the safest person to risk. That is not the same thing." "Then explain the difference." He opened his mouth, closed it. No one helped him. For the first time in my life, a family room did not automatically bend toward his confidence. Aunt Diane looked down at the email. Emily stared at her hands. Uncle Robert leaned back and said nothing. Grandma Elise watched Dad with an expression I could not read. Mom looked at me with raw anger. "You planned this." I shook my head. "You planned the meeting. You came with documents. Because I knew you would tell everyone I misunderstood. You wanted to embarrass your father." If I wanted to embarrass Dad, I could have sent this email to everyone weeks ago. That stopped her. It was true. I had not posted anything online. I had not mass emailed relatives. I had not called Dad's friends. I had not contacted Jenna's clients. Every public consequence so far had come from my parents deciding that pressure worked better with witnesses. Dad saw the room slipping away from him. And just like I expected, he changed direction. Whatever Sharon and I did, Jenna did not know. Jenna looked at him. For the first time that afternoon, she looked afraid. Dad continued. "She called us because her business was in trouble. We handled the financing. She did not submit anything. She did not know how we structured it. I nodded. That part is true. Jenna's shoulders lowered slightly. Then Dad made the mistake. She knew nothing. I looked at him. Nothing? Nothing relevant to the loan. I reached for my phone. Jenna said, "Allison." I looked at her. She knew exactly what I was opening. I did not read the whole thread. I did not need to. I gave enough context first. This is the group conversation Jenna sent me herself, because she wanted to show that Dad controlled the financial decisions. Dad's expression hardened. I scrolled. Dad wrote that they were using Allison's side for the temporary gap. Mom wrote that I would be furious if I started asking questions. Then Dad wrote, "Do not bring any of this up with Allison until after the wedding." I looked at Jenna. Then I read her line. "Fine. Just make sure this doesn't blow up before Saturday." Emily slowly turned toward her. Jenna's face flushed. "I did not know he opened a loan. I have already said that." "Then stop doing this. I'm not accusing you of submitting it. You are making everyone think I was part of it. You knew there was an arrangement involving me. You knew I had not been told. You knew I would be angry if I learned about it. You chose not to ask why. That does not mean I knew. It means you knew enough to avoid knowing more." She stood up. Mom immediately reached for her arm. "Sit down." "No." Jenna looked at me. "I sent you those because I thought you would be fair." "I am being fair." "No. You're punishing me for not being suspicious of my own parents. I'm holding Dad responsible for the loan. I'm holding you responsible for your own words. That is not the same thing." "Exactly." She stared at me. For once, she had no ready answer. Dad pushed back from the table. "This is over." Nobody moved. He looked around the room. "I said this is over." Uncle Robert spoke. "No, James. I think this is the first time I understand what actually happened." Dad's face changed. Robert continued. "You used her name. She didn't agree. You plan to pay it back. Fine. But that doesn't make the first part disappear." Dad shook his head. "You don't know the full financial picture. I don't need to know the full financial picture to know I wouldn't want someone borrowing in my name without asking." Mom looked betrayed. "You're taking her side?" Robert frowned. "I didn't know there were sides until you called us here." That landed harder than anything I had said. Aunt Diane looked at Mom. "You wanted everyone involved." Mom said nothing. Diane continued. "Now everyone knows." I almost smiled because those were the exact words I had planned to use. I did not. Not yet. Grandma Elise finally stood. She moved slowly, one hand on the chair. She looked at Dad first. Then Mom. Then Jenna. "I love all of you," she said. "That does not make all of you right." Mom's eyes filled. "Mom? No." Grandma rarely interrupted anyone. That made everyone stop. "You taught those girls different rules." Mom stared at her. Grandma pointed at Jenna first. "When she fell, you ran." Then she looked at me. "When Allison fell, you told her she could stand." Mom whispered, "That's not fair." "Maybe not." But I watched it. I did not expect that. It hurt more than validation usually does. Because if Grandma had seen it, then it had been visible. I had spent years wondering whether I was too sensitive. Grandma sat back down. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Dad recovered first. He always did. "This is becoming emotional." That is exactly why I wanted us to focus on solutions. I almost laughed. "What solution?" "The property sale. Repayment does not change authorization. The lender needs to hear that the money is being returned. I already told them you intend to repay." "And the police?" I told the truth. Dad's voice sharpened. "You could tell them you don't want this pursued. I can tell them whatever they ask me truthfully. You know what I mean." "Yes. And?" "No." Mom covered her mouth. Jenna looked away. Dad stared at me. "You've already won." That sentence surprised me. "Won what?" "The room. The family. Whatever this was supposed to be." I looked around. Nobody looked victorious. Not even me. This was not supposed to be anything. "Then stop. I'm not doing anything to you. You filed the report. Because the lender found evidence connecting you to an unauthorized application in my name. You could still stop cooperating. There it was. The real purpose of the meeting. Not reconciliation. Not clarity. They wanted me to become the missing shield. I stood. Mom stood too. Where are you going? Home. We are not finished. I am. Dad's voice became low. If you walk out, you are choosing outsiders over this family. I put the 3 documents back into the folder. No. He stared at me. You brought everyone into this. I looked directly at him. You wanted everyone involved. Now everyone knows. Mom flinched. I picked up my purse. Jenna said my name. I stopped. She looked angry, embarrassed, and scared all at once. For a second, I wondered whether she was going to apologize. She did not. Was that worth it? I looked at her. I didn't call the meeting. Then I left. Nobody followed me to the driveway. That was a relief. I sat in my car with both hands on the steering wheel and waited for the shaking to stop. It was not triumph. That is the part I remember most clearly. I had just watched my parents lose control of the story in front of the family they had assembled to control me, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired, but underneath the exhaustion was something I had not felt since the loan appeared on my credit report. Clean air. No more wondering whether I needed better wording. No more waiting for the perfect explanation that would make them understand. They understood enough. They simply disagreed with my right to say no. That distinction freed me. I called Adam. It's over. How bad? Bad. Do you want me to come get you? I'm already in the car. Do you want to talk? Not yet. Okay. That was all he said. I drove home. Marissa texted while I was at a red light. How did the room go? I typed back after I parked. They called the jury and lost control of the courtroom. Her reply came immediately. Sounds expensive. I laughed for the first time all day. Then my phone buzzed again. Not Mom. Not Dad. Not Jenna. The lender. I opened the email standing in my kitchen. The investigator wrote that the liability review was moving toward a fraud determination based on the evidence already collected. They needed clarification on a repayment proposal Dad had recently submitted. There were attachments. I almost closed the message for the night. Then I saw the file names. Property sale summary. Line of credit statement. Repayment schedule. Supporting asset documentation. I opened the first attachment. The number at the bottom made me sit down. Not because my parents were richer than I thought. Because they were not. For years, Mom and Dad had acted as if helping Jenna was something they could easily afford. The documents in front of me suggested something very different. They had not reached for my credit because it was convenient. They had reached for it because they were running out of their own. The first attachment was not a secret bank statement or some document the lender had somehow pulled from my parents' private accounts. It was part of the repayment proposal Dad himself had submitted because he was trying to prove he could make the loan whole. That mattered to me. By then, I was careful about where every piece of information came from. I was not going to build my case out of documents I had no right to see. But if Dad wanted me and the lender to believe he had a credible repayment plan, he had to show where the money was supposed to come from. The property sale summary was for a small investment property Mom and Dad had owned for years. I knew about it in a vague way. Dad had mentioned it whenever he talked about retirement, usually with the confidence of someone who had 3 plans for every dollar. I had assumed the property was one part of a much larger cushion. The documents suggested otherwise. The estimated proceeds were significant, but not enough to make the rest of the numbers comfortable. There was a line of credit with a balance far higher than I expected. There were references to prior transfers supporting Jenna's business. There was a repayment schedule that only worked if the property sold near the projected price and if no new emergency appeared in the meantime. I sat at the kitchen table and read everything twice. Then I went back to the old joint account statements. The pattern started to form. Not every dollar was visible to me, and I did not pretend it was. I could only see transactions from the account that still had my name on it, plus what Dad had chosen to disclose in his proposal. But that was enough to show this had not begun with the fraudulent loan. There had been repeated transfers over time. Some were small enough that I would never have noticed them if I had not been looking for a pattern. Others were not. A payment toward Jenna's studio lease. A transfer that matched a vendor obligation. Money moved out, then later replaced. Then another gap. Then another rescue. Dad had not sent me a neat spreadsheet labeled years of bailing out Jenna. He did not need to. The shape was visible without one. They had been feeding her business for a long time, and the more they fed it, the more they needed to believe the next infusion would be the last. Adam came into the kitchen and found me surrounded by printed pages again. You opened the attachments. I did. He looked at my face. Bad? Different. He sat across from me. I turned the property summary toward him. I thought they were protecting Jenna because they could afford to. And? They can't. He read silently for a minute. I pointed to the line of credit. That's not everything, but it's enough. He looked up. How long has this been going on? I don't know exactly. I hated saying that, but it was true. I can see repeated support. Dad's proposal references money already committed. The property sale is not just to repay the loan in my name, it's part of a bigger whole. Adam leaned back. Does Jenna know? Probably not the full picture. That was not me defending her. It was just consistent with everything I had seen. Jenna liked not knowing how the rescue happened. Dad liked being the person who made it happen. Mom liked believing that if they kept everyone from falling apart, they were holding the family together. It was a system that worked until the money ran out. I called Dad the next morning, not because I wanted to argue, because his own proposal had created questions. He answered in a voice that was almost businesslike. I assume you saw the documents. I did. Then you understand I can repay the loan. I understand you intend to sell the property. It's already being prepared for sale. And the line of credit? That's manageable. Is it? He went quiet. I continued. How much have you put into Jenna's business? That is not relevant. It is if you're telling me this was one temporary bridge. You're looking at several years of normal family support and trying to turn it into something sinister. How much? He sighed. I don't have a clean number in front of me. That answer told me more than a number would have. Dad always had numbers. If he did not want to give one, either he did not like it, or he did not want to see it. You've been covering recurring problems. We've been helping her through growth. Dad, she had contracts. That did not answer me. His voice sharpened. She had a viable business. Had? There was a pause. Then he said, she still does. I looked at the documents again. No. She has a business being kept alive by outside money. That is an incredibly simplistic way to look at it. Then give me a better one. He did. Or at least, he tried. He told me Jenna had come too far to let one bad season destroy everything. He talked about reputation, client confidence, vendor relationships, and sunk investments without ever using the phrase sunk cost. He said if they stopped now, all the money they had already put in would have been wasted. That was when I finally understood part of his motive. Dad was not just rescuing Jenna. He was rescuing his own previous decisions. Every new dollar had to justify the old dollars. Every new bailout had to prove the last bailout had been wise. If Jenna's business failed now, it would not only mean Jenna had failed. It would mean Dad had spent years funding a problem he had mistaken for an opportunity. I couldn't just let her collapse after everything we'd already put in, he said. There it was. Not after everything she had put in. Everything we had put in. The business had become a referendum on him too. What would have happened if you stopped? She would have lost the studio. And clients. And she would have had to shut down or restart much smaller. I waited. That's not death, Dad. You don't understand. I understand exactly. You preferred using my identity to letting Jenna become smaller. That is an ugly way to say it. It is an ugly thing. He went silent. Then he shifted back to repayment. That was Dad's refuge whenever motive became uncomfortable. The property would sell. The loan would be repaid. The lender would be satisfied. He wanted me to look at outcome instead of method. I told him the same thing I had been telling him for weeks. Repayment did not create permission. After we hung up, Mom called. I almost ignored it. Then I answered because I wanted to hear what she would say about the documents. She surprised me. I knew we were stretched, she said. Not broke, not desperate, stretched. That was the kind of word Mom chose when the truth felt too harsh. How stretched? More than I liked. Did you know about the line of credit? Yes. The transfers? Most of them. Did you know the property sale was carrying this much weight? She hesitated. Your father handled the details. I closed my eyes. That sentence explained her as clearly as Jenna's screenshots explained Jenna. Dad handled the details. Jenna accepted the rescue. Mom protected the story. What did you think would happen if Jenna's business failed? I asked. She would have been devastated. That's emotional. I'm asking what you thought would actually happen. She might have had to close. And then? I don't know. Get a job? Mom sounded offended. She built that business. I know. For years. I know. You say it like none of that matters. It matters. It just does not make the business entitled to survive forever. She went quiet. Then she said, You always had an easier time walking away from things. I frowned. What does that mean? You are practical. If something is not working, you cut it off. Jenna is not like that. That doesn't make me heartless. I didn't say heartless. No. You said practical like it was a deficiency. I said you're stronger. The word landed exactly where it always did. Mom, strength is not an unlimited credit line. That is not what I meant. I know. That's the problem. None of you ever mean it that way, but you keep using it that way. She was quiet for a while. Then she said something that made the whole system clearer. I was trying to keep everyone from falling apart. Not just Jenna. Everyone. That was how Mom saw herself. The person holding the family together. If Jenna failed, Mom failed. If Dad admitted the money was gone, Mom failed. If I refused to rescue them, I was the person pulling the family apart. I had spent years thinking Mom simply favored Jenna. That was true, but incomplete. Mom also needed the family to keep needing her version of unity. She needed crisis because crisis gave her a role. I did not tell her that as a fact. I did not know her mind. But looking back now, it was what I came to believe from the way she talked about every problem. She never asked whether an arrangement was healthy. She asked whether everyone was still at the table. By the end of the call, I felt something I had not expected. Pity. Not enough to change what I was doing. But enough that, for one dangerous minute, I opened my banking app and started calculating. I could help with part of the property gap. Not all of it. Not without hurting Adam and me. But enough to reduce the pressure. The thought came so naturally that I almost did not recognize it. That was the old reflex. See a family emergency. Measure what I can absorb. Take some of it. I stared at the screen until the absurdity became obvious. I had just spent weeks arguing that my stability did not make me family collateral. And there I was, considering volunteering to become exactly that. I closed the app. Marissa came over that evening. I showed her the repayment proposal because it directly affected the situation and because I wanted another set of eyes on what I was interpreting. She read quietly. Then she looked at me. You're thinking about helping them. I hated that she could see it. A little. She did not say no. That was why I trusted her. She only asked, What problem would your money solve? The property sale pressure. No. Bigger. I looked at her. What problem? I knew the answer before I said it. The consequences. She nodded. And are the consequences the problem? I looked back down at the papers. No. The consequences were evidence that the real problem had finally stopped being subsidized. 2 days later, I received a notice forwarded from Jenna's business account as part of the repayment discussion Dad had been using to justify urgency. It showed what the transaction history had already suggested. The company was not facing one isolated invoice. There were lease issues, inventory costs, overdue obligations, and cash flow problems layered on top of each other. Jenna's business was not dying because one payment had arrived late. It was structurally weak. Dad's money had not saved it. He had postponed the moment everyone had to admit what it was. Within weeks, Jenna began talking about closing the studio and operating smaller. For the first time, nobody stepped in immediately with another loan. Then Dad sent me a new proposal. He would proceed with selling the property. He would repay what he could. He would cooperate with restitution. And in return, he wanted me to stop actively escalating the case and stop voluntarily providing new evidence unless I was specifically required to do so. I read the message slowly. He still thought truth was negotiable. He still thought if he could put a number on repayment, he could buy control over what happened next. I did not answer that night. I sat with the proposal open in front of me and realized the choice had become much simpler than the family wanted it to be. I was not deciding whether to destroy them. I was deciding whether, one more time, I would stand between them and the consequences of what they had already done. I did not answer Dad's proposal that night because I wanted to be certain I was rejecting the right thing. By then, I understood that I could not control whether the lender referred evidence, whether the police investigated, or whether a prosecutor eventually decided there was a case. I could not simply drop charges because my father offered to repay the money. What I could control was smaller and, in some ways, harder. I could tell the truth when I was asked, preserve what I had already provided, refuse to withdraw the fraud affidavit, and refuse to spend my own money cushioning the consequences. The next morning, I called Dad. He answered immediately. Did you read what I sent? Yes. And? I'm not agreeing to it. He went silent for half a second, then shifted into the voice he used when negotiating. Which part? The part where repayment is supposed to buy my cooperation in making this smaller. That's not what I said. You asked me to stop voluntarily providing evidence. I asked you to stop escalating. I haven't created any new facts. You keep feeding them information. When they ask questions, I answer. You could answer less. That sentence told me exactly what he wanted. No, Allison, the property is being sold. I am making restitution. The lender can be made whole. You can be made whole. Paying it back fixes the balance. It doesn't create my permission. He made an impatient sound. Everything has to be about permission with you. Yes, when the debt is in my name, it does. You know I was never going to leave you with it. I know you plan to repay it. Then what are you trying to accomplish? Nothing. That is obviously not true. I'm not trying to accomplish anything, Dad. I'm refusing to lie for you. His tone changed. I never asked you to lie. You want me to stop helping the people investigating something that happened to me because you've decided repayment should be enough. I want proportionality. You wanted proportionality before you used my name? He did not answer. I continued before he could turn the conversation toward Jenna. I am not asking anyone to punish you more than the evidence supports. I'm also not asking anyone to protect you from what the evidence supports. That is the difference. You've already made your point. This was never a point. You embarrassed us in front of the family. You called the meeting. You filed a police report. Because the lender found activity connected to you on an application I did not authorize. And now the property has to be sold. That was already in your repayment plan before I knew how deep the problem went. He became quiet. I could hear the anger in his breathing. Finally, he said, You are choosing punishment. No, I'm choosing not to take responsibility for preventing it. Then I ended the call. Mom called that afternoon. She did not mention Jenna first. That surprised me. Your father says you rejected the proposal. Yes, he is selling the property. I know. That was supposed to be part of our retirement. I know. We're going to lose more than you understand. I sat at my desk and looked out the window. For weeks, everyone had been measuring what I could afford to lose. Now Mom wanted me to measure what they could. I'm sorry, I said. She sounded almost offended. That's it? What do you want me to say? I want to know whether you're really going to let this happen to your father. I closed my eyes. The old version of the question would have worked on me. Are you going to let Jenna lose her business? Are you going to let Mom sit alone? Are you going to let Dad be disappointed? Every version placed me between someone I loved and the result of their own choices, then called my refusal cruelty. No, I said. I'm finally letting what he did happen to him. She inhaled sharply. You make it sound so simple. It wasn't simple when he did it. It isn't simple now. You know he thought he was protecting Jenna. I know. You know he thought he could repay everything. I know. Then have some compassion. I do have compassion. It doesn't sound like it. Compassion is why I'm not celebrating any of this. It doesn't require me to stop it. Mom was quiet. Then she said, We may have to change everything. The property. Our plans. We were supposed to have security. The word struck me. Security. They had risked mine because they thought I had enough. Now theirs felt sacred. "I hope you'll be fine," I said. She did not respond. I almost regretted the sentence because it sounded too close to the words she had used on me for years. So I added what I actually meant. "But it isn't my job to make sure anymore." Mom cried quietly. I did not hang up immediately. I let her cry. There was a difference between refusing to rescue her and needing to punish her for being afraid. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller. "I don't know what our family looks like after this." "Neither do I." "Does that bother you?" "Of course it does. You don't sound bothered. I don't have to fall apart for something to hurt." That was the last real conversation Mom and I had for several months. After that, the case moved at the speed real processes move, which was slower and less dramatic than anyone in my family seemed prepared for. There was no day when everything suddenly resolved. There were requests for documents, confirmation calls, follow-up questions, periods of silence. Then another email asking me to verify something I had already discussed weeks earlier. The lender's liability review continued separately from the police report. I kept records, responded when asked, and otherwise went to work, came home to Adam, and tried to build a marriage that did not revolve around the Pierce family. A little over 3 months after the wedding, the lender formally notified me that it had determined I was not responsible for the loan. The account was removed from my liability, and the credit reporting issues were corrected through the lender's process. I read the notice twice before I believed it. I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I cried. Not because I was sad the debt was gone, because for months, a number I had never agreed to had sat beside my name as if somebody else's decision belonged to me. Seeing it removed felt like getting my own signature back. Adam found me at the kitchen table, holding the letter. "Good news?" I nodded. "The best kind." He read it, set it down, and kissed the top of my head. No speech. No celebration dinner. We ordered Thai food and watched a terrible movie because normal life had become its own kind of victory. The law enforcement side took longer. The lender had preserved its application records and supplied information through the proper process. The police investigator verified the contact and access evidence connecting Dad to the application. They also reviewed the bank trail, his email admitting he had handled the paperwork, and the statements I had already given. I was interviewed again. So was Dad. I do not know everything he said in those interviews, and I never pretended I did. I only knew what I was later told through the process, and what Dad eventually admitted himself. There was no dramatic arrest at his house. No neighbors watching from lawns. No 3 police cars. Months passed. By spring, Dad had an attorney. By early summer, there was a negotiated resolution moving through the prosecutor's office. He eventually accepted a plea to an offense tied to the fraudulent use of my identity and the unauthorized financing. The exact language mattered to the lawyers more than it mattered to me. What mattered was that the final outcome recognized something my family had spent months trying to soften. I had not agreed. Dad was ordered to satisfy restitution obligations, pay additional financial penalties and legal costs, comply with the conditions attached to his plea, and live with a criminal record. He did not go to prison. I did not need him to. The consequence that seemed to hurt him most had nothing to do with a cell. People stopped asking him to handle things. Uncle Robert no longer called him about investments. Grandma Elise moved copies of important paperwork out of Dad's keeping. A cousin who had once asked him to help evaluate a car loan quietly asked someone else. Dad had spent his adult life being the Pierce family fixer. Now every piece of financial advice carried an invisible question beside it. Can we trust him with this? Mom did not face the same criminal outcome because the evidence did not show her submitting the application the way it showed Dad's involvement. But she had moved the money, knew where it came from, participated in the plan to repay it before I noticed, and then spent weeks asking me to call it a misunderstanding. The financial consequences still reached her. The property belonged to both of them. The legal bills came out of their household. Restitution and repayment did not care which one of them had preferred not to know every detail. The investment property sold in the spring, not for the optimistic number Dad had originally projected. Enough to cover important obligations. Not enough to restore the life they had expected. Mom and Dad did not become poor overnight. That would have been melodrama. They still had a home. They still had income and retirement resources. What they lost was margin. The comfortable assumption that there would always be another reserve, another asset, another person who could absorb the next problem. Jenna lost that assumption too. Without mom and dad feeding money into the company, her studio lasted only a few more months. She ended the lease, sold inventory, settled what obligations she could, and moved the business into something smaller that did not require pretending she was running an operation twice its real size. For a while, she blamed me. She did not say it directly at first. She told relatives the business could have survived if the family had not been forced to liquidate resources. Aunt Diane apparently asked her one question: was Allison supposed to fund it forever? Jenna stopped repeating that version around her. By summer, she took a salaried job with a larger design company and kept a handful of private clients on the side. I heard about it from Grandma. I did not reach out. I was glad she had income. I was glad she was working. I was also unwilling to turn the first adult consequence she had ever been forced to absorb into my invitation to rebuild our relationship. Mom's social world changed in quieter ways. She still attended family dinners. She still called relatives. But she no longer got to tell the story uncontested. The first time she tried to say, I had chosen Marissa over family at my own wedding, Grandma corrected her. No. You tried to replace Marissa after Allison told you no. When Mom called the loan temporary help, Uncle Robert corrected that too. Temporary does not mean authorized. Eventually, Mom stopped telling the story. That may have been the most humiliating consequence for her. Not that people hated her. They did not. They simply stopped allowing her version to become reality, through repetition. By August, almost 9 months had passed since the wedding. The lender issue was resolved. Dad's plea was behind him. The property was gone. Jenna's studio was closed. And for the first time since the credit alert appeared on my phone, there was nothing I needed to do. No document to send. No investigator to call. No relative to correct. No family meeting waiting for me. I thought silence would feel empty. It did not. It felt expensive, like something I had finally stopped giving away. Then, one afternoon, I came home and found a cream-colored envelope in the mailbox. My married name was written on the front in Mom's handwriting. There was no return address, but I knew before I opened it. I stood in the kitchen for almost a minute holding it. Then I slid my finger under the flap. Inside was a photograph from my wedding. Marissa stood beside me, holding the bouquet Mom had tried to take from her. My parents were not in the picture. On the back, Mom had written 6 lines. I read the first one. Then I sat down. For the first time since the wedding, she was not asking me to fix anything. I turned the photograph over again and read Mom's note from the beginning. Her handwriting looked different from the way it usually did on birthday cards or envelopes. Smaller, less certain. Like she had stopped after every sentence to decide whether she had actually earned the right to write the next one. I spent years saying you were the one I didn't have to worry about. I'm starting to understand what that cost you. I thought being the strong one meant you needed less from us. I see now that I used your strength as permission. I am sorry. I don't expect you to answer. I read the 6 lines 3 times. Partly because I did not trust the first reaction that moved through me. Relief came first, and I resented it. I had wanted those words for years without realizing I wanted them. Not the apology itself. The recognition. The simple admission that my competence had not meant I needed less care, less honesty, or less respect. For most of my life, whenever I tried to explain that distinction, Mom treated it like an accusation against her motherhood. Now, for the first time, she had written it down herself. What struck me most was what the note did not contain. There was no request to call her. No line about Dad having suffered enough. No reminder that Jenna was trying. No warning that Grandma was getting older. No suggestion that the family needed healing, and I was somehow responsible for supplying it. Mom had spent months attaching every apology to an assignment. She would acknowledge that she understood why I was upset, then ask whether I could contact the lender and soften something. She would admit that Dad should not have used my credit. then remind me that the property sale was hurting them. She would say she was sorry I felt pushed aside at the wedding, then tell me Marissa had made the situation worse. Every opening toward accountability had come with a hook buried inside it. This note did not. Adam found me at the kitchen table with the photograph in one hand and the note in the other. He had learned over the previous 9 months not to ask, "What happened now?" because sometimes nothing new had happened and I was simply processing something old. He looked at my face, then at the envelope. "Your mom?" he asked. I nodded and handed him the note. He read it quietly, turned the photograph over, then looked at the front. The picture was from the ceremony. Marissa stood beside me, holding the bouquet Mom had tried to put into Jenna's hands. Adam was not visible because of the angle, but I knew exactly where he had been standing when the photographer took it, across from me waiting. Present, not deciding for me. "What do you think?" he asked. I think she finally said the thing she kept avoiding. "Does it change anything?" I looked at the note again. Yes and no. He nodded as though that made perfect sense. That was one of the quiet gifts of being married to Adam. He did not demand emotional efficiency. He never needed me to decide immediately whether something was good or bad, forgivable or unforgivable, finished or unfinished. My family had always treated ambiguity as a problem that needed to be resolved before dinner. Adam could let something be true in 2 directions at once. Mom's note mattered to me. Mom's note was not enough to restore trust. Both things were true. "Do you want to call her?" he asked. "I don't know." "Then don't call until you do." That answer would have frustrated Mom once. She would have heard hesitation as delay and delay as punishment. Adam heard it for what it was. I did not know yet. I left the photograph on the kitchen counter for the rest of the afternoon. Every time I passed it, I stopped without meaning to. The first few times, I looked at Mom's handwriting. Later, I looked at the picture itself. Marissa's posture. My face, the bouquet, the empty front row just outside the frame. I realized I had spent months thinking about that day through the actions of the people who had disrupted it. Dad calling security, Mom moving the bouquet, Jenna accepting it, Mom blurting out the truth about the loan, Dad trying to call fraud a family misunderstanding. All of those moments mattered, but the photograph showed me something I had almost missed. The wedding still happened. I was still there. Marissa was still beside me. Adam still waited for me. They had tried to rearrange the day around their priorities, and I had stopped them before they could. That mattered more than their attempt. The old version of me would have called Mom that evening. I know that because I had done it before. Recognition had always been enough to pull me back in. If Mom admitted one thing, I rewarded the admission by opening the door wider. If Dad softened his tone, I took it as progress and moved toward him. If Jenna showed even the smallest amount of self-awareness, I translated it into more than it was because I wanted a sister who understood me. I had spent years mistaking acknowledgement for repair. That night, I did something different. I put Mom's note in a drawer. Not in the trash. Not in a frame. A drawer. That was where the relationship belonged for the moment too. Not destroyed, not restored. Held somewhere I did not have to look at every hour while I decided what I actually wanted. A week later, Dad emailed me. The subject line was, "No response required." I almost laughed when I saw it, because that alone was proof of change. My father had never sent me anything emotionally significant, without also telling me what I should do next. The email itself was short. He wrote that he had spent more time than he wanted, thinking about the difference between intention and permission. He said he still believed he had been trying to keep Jenna's business alive, but he no longer believed that motive gave him any right to use my identity. He did not mention the prosecutor. He did not mention the property sale. He did not mention how much money the entire situation had cost him. He did not remind me that he had avoided prison or argue that his plea had been harsh enough. Instead, he referred to the memory I had been carrying since the lender's investigation. The afternoon when I was 17 and he taught me how to read a bank statement. "You were right about something I taught you and then failed to follow myself," he wrote. "Understanding what you sign matters. So does having the right to sign it." I sat at my desk for a long time after reading that. There was no satisfying version of the story where Dad became a stranger and I got to hate him cleanly. He had loved me. He had taught me things. He had made me laugh. He had shown up when I needed him. He had also decided that my credit, my identity, and my refusal were negotiable when Jenna needed something. Those truths had spent months fighting each other in my head because I thought only one could be real. By the time I read his email, I finally understood that adulthood sometimes means letting incompatible truths remain true at the same time. Someone can love you and violate you. Someone can teach you a value and later betray it. Someone can be responsible for real harm without becoming nothing but the worst thing they did. Understanding that did not require me to trust Dad again. It only meant I no longer needed to flatten him into a villain to justify my boundary. I waited 2 days before answering. I read this. Thank you for saying it plainly. I am not ready for more than that right now. He replied less than an hour later. I understand. That was all. No second email. No attempt to bargain his way back into my life. No reminder that he was still my father. For the first time in years, I gave Dad an answer, and he treated it as an answer. It did not repair the relationship, but it was probably the first thing that could have made repair possible someday. Mom took longer for me, not because I thought she was worse than Dad. In some ways, Dad's actions had been easier to classify. The application records tied him directly to the loan. His email exposed his logic. The transaction trails showed what happened. Mom's damage was softer and older. It lived in sentences, expectations, looks across dinner tables. Choices made so often that everyone forgot they were choices. You're the one I don't worry about. You'll be fine. Jenna needs us right now. You understand. It had taken me much longer to realize that neglect did not stop being neglect simply because it arrived disguised as confidence. I did not call Mom after receiving her note. She did not call me either. For almost a month, nothing happened. Then she sent a short text asking whether Adam and I wanted the holiday ornaments she had stored for me since childhood. No mention of the case. No attempt to use the ornaments as an excuse to make me come to the house. I replied, "Yes. You can leave them with Aunt Diane." She wrote, "Okay." A year earlier, that exchange would have been impossible. Mom would have said I should come pick them up myself. She would have called the distance cruel. She would have turned a box of ornaments into proof that I was rejecting the family. This time, she left them with Diane. No message hidden inside. No photograph taped to the top. Just the box. That restraint mattered more to me than another apology would have. Jenna was different. For months, I only heard about her through other people. Grandma Elise told me she had started working for a larger design company. Aunt Diane said the job was stable, and Jenna seemed embarrassed about how much she liked receiving a predictable paycheck. Uncle Robert mentioned that she had sold the SUV and moved into a smaller apartment. Nobody framed those changes as tragedy anymore. At first, every update created a familiar ache in me. I knew I had not destroyed Jenna's business. The records were clear. The studio had been weak for years. Mom and Dad had been feeding money into it long before they used my identity. My fraud dispute did not make the business unsustainable. It simply removed the next unauthorized source of support. Still, I had been trained to hear Jenna is struggling and immediately calculate what I could do. The reflex survived even after I understood it. That surprised me. I had assumed once I saw the pattern, it would disappear. It did not. Awareness only gave me a second between the feeling and the action. In that second, I learned to ask myself a different question. Is this mine? Jenna's studio lease was not mine. Her professional reputation was not mine. My parents' lost property was not mine. Dad's criminal record was not mine. Mom's embarrassment was not mine. Their feelings about my boundaries were not mine. That did not mean I stopped caring. It meant caring stopped automatically becoming responsibility. One evening in July, Jenna texted me directly for the first time in nearly 4 months. I paid off the last balance from the studio lease today. Not Mom and Dad. Me. I know that should have happened sooner. I'm not asking you for anything. I just wanted you to know. I sat on the couch with my phone in my hand and read the message twice. The sentence that mattered most was not, "I paid it off." It was, "I'm not asking you for anything." Jenna had spent most of her life making need the center of every relationship. Sometimes she did it intentionally. Often she did not. She had simply learned that if she was struggling loudly enough, people moved toward her. For the first time, she was telling me about a problem after she had handled it. No request, no audience, no resque. I waited until the next morning before answering because I wanted to make sure I was responding to what she actually wrote, not to the sister I wished she had been years earlier. "I'm glad you handled it." She sent back a thumbs up. That was all. There was a time when I would have found that disappointing. I would have wanted the emotional conversation, the apology, the explanation, the promise that things were different. Instead, I found the simplicity reassuring. She did not ask me to absolve her. I did not ask her to perform remorse. For once, we each stayed on our own side of the line. I did not suddenly trust Jenna again. I did not invite her over for dinner. We did not become sisters who called each other every weekend. But something small changed. I could imagine a future where she became someone I might know again, not someone I needed to manage. That was enough. The wedding album arrived in August, almost 9 months after the ceremony. The photographer had delivered the digital gallery long before, but I had delayed ordering the physical album. At first, every time I looked through the photographs, I saw absence before anything else. 3 empty seats. No picture of Mom fastening my veil. No father-daughter dance. No family portrait with Jenna standing beside me. The images seemed to record everything that had gone wrong. Over time, that changed. I stopped seeing the missing people first. I started seeing who remained. Adam's mother laughing during dinner with her head thrown back. Grandma Elise holding both hands around a champagne glass. Aunt Diane dancing with someone she had apparently met 10 minutes earlier. Adam watching me during the vows, as if the entire room had narrowed to one person. Marissa standing beside me. The album was heavier than I expected, wrapped in linen with our names pressed into the cover. I waited until after dinner to open it because I wanted time. Adam sat beside me on the couch while I turned the pages. We did not talk much. Some photographs did not need commentary. Then I reached the ceremony. There was the image Mom had mailed me. Marissa beside me. Bouquet in hand. I stopped. Adam noticed. "That one?" "Yeah." He put his arm around me and let me look. A week later, I called Marissa. My album came. Oh no. Why oh no? Because now, I have to find out how often the photographer caught me making weird faces. "You look fine." "That sounds suspicious." "Come over." She showed up with takeout and immediately began inspecting every photograph of herself before allowing me to continue through the album in order. That was Marissa's gift, too. She knew how to refuse tragedy its full weight. We sat on the floor with the album between us. At the ceremony page, she became quiet. Her finger rested near the edge of the photograph. "I still can't believe your mother took that bouquet out of my hand." "I can." Marissa looked at me. "Fair." The florist had wrapped the bouquet stems in ivory ribbon. After the wedding, before the flowers dried completely, I had cut away a small section of that ribbon and saved it. I did not know why at the time. I was not especially sentimental about flowers. I pulled the strip from the back pocket of the album. Marissa stared at it. "You kept that?" "Apparently." "Why?" I looked at the ribbon. For months, I had thought it represented the moment Mom tried to replace Marissa. Then I realized that was not why I had kept it, because I took it back. Marissa smiled slowly. "Now that makes sense." I ran the ribbon between my fingers. It was such a small thing. Fabric. Flowers. A position in a ceremony that lasted less than an hour. But the moment had contained the entire family system in miniature. Mom took something from the person I had chosen. She gave it to Jenna. She expected me to accept the change because correcting it would create tension. She did not ask. She announced. And I took it back. Immediately. The loan had been far more serious. The legal consequences had been far larger. But emotionally, I think the bouquet was where the cycle broke. I did not wait for everyone to understand. I did not ask whether Mom agreed that my boundary was reasonable. I did not weigh whether Jenna would be embarrassed. I did not worry whether Dad would call me dramatic. I simply restored the decision that had already been mine. Marissa turned the page. You know what I remember most about that hallway? What? You didn't look scared. I laughed. I was terrified. I know. That seems contradictory. No, you look done. That word stayed with me. Done. Not angry. Not fearless. Done negotiating. For most of my adult life, I had believed maturity meant remaining calm enough to absorb other people's chaos. If I could tolerate something without falling apart, I thought that made tolerating it the better choice. I had confused capacity with obligation. My parents made the same mistake from the opposite direction. Allison can handle disappointment. Allison can recover financially. Allison has Adam. Allison has savings. Allison will be fine. Each sentence sounded like faith in me until I finally noticed what followed. So give Jenna the thing. So take the risk with Allison. So let Allison wait. So ask Allison to forgive. So make Allison carry it. My strength had become evidence that I was the safest person to hurt. That was the belief I had finally rejected. By the time I am telling this story, my relationship with Dad exists mostly through occasional emails. He does not ask about my finances. He does not offer financial advice unless I specifically ask, which I have not. He still has his opinions. I am sure he still thinks some consequences were harsher than necessary. But he no longer asks me to change the facts to make him more comfortable. Mom and I have spoken a handful of times. The first call was awkward. She asked about work. I asked about Grandma. We avoided the wedding. We avoided Jenna. We avoided money. 10 minutes in, I realized Mom was not waiting for an opening to pull me into a larger conversation. That was new. At the end, she said, "I'm glad you answered." I said, "Me too." That was all. I do not know whether we will ever have the kind of mother-daughter relationship she tells herself we once had. I am not even sure that relationship existed outside her memory. What we may be able to build instead is something narrower and more honest. I would rather have that than a beautiful lie. Jenna and I remain distant. Maybe that changes. Maybe it does not. I no longer feel obligated to turn biological closeness into emotional closeness on command. I used to think family relationships failed only when people stopped trying. Now I think some relationships become healthier when people stop forcing them into shapes they cannot hold. Grandma still calls me more than she did before the wedding. She never says she is checking whether I am fine. She asks what I am doing. There is a difference. Aunt Diane still sends me family news even when I tell her I am not asking. Uncle Robert still will not discuss finances with Dad. I suspect that consequence bothers Dad more than the formal ones sometimes. For years, his identity in the family had been built around competence. He was the man people asked about investments, car loans, contracts, and business decisions. Now people still love him. They simply verify the paperwork themselves. There is a certain poetry in that. Mom stopped using the phrase, "family comes first," around me. I do not know if she noticed. I did. The family did not disappear after everything happened. That was something I had once feared. It rearranged. Some people moved closer. Some moved farther away. Some relationships narrowed. Some became clearer. For years, Mom had treated rearrangement as failure. If everyone did not sit at the same table, agree with the same version of events, and perform closeness in photographs, something was wrong. I no longer believe that. Sometimes the healthiest family picture is the one that finally reflects reality. When I look at my wedding photographs now, I do not see the empty seats as proof that my parents ruined something. I see them as evidence that the ceremony did not require people who refused to respect it. I see Adam waiting. I see Marissa beside me. I see myself standing upright. For months, I thought those 3 empty chairs represented what I lost that day. Now they represent what I stopped carrying. Dad's consequences belong to Dad. Mom's disappointment belongs to Mom. Jenna's recovery belongs to Jenna. My life belongs to me. That separation has made me softer in ways I did not expect. I am less angry now. Not because what happened became less serious. Because I am no longer spending energy trying to convince people that it was serious. I know what happened. The lender knew. The bank trail showed it. Dad admitted enough. Mom eventually acknowledged the pattern. Jenna finally began handling her own obligations. I no longer need unanimous agreement. That may be the biggest change of all. Before this, I thought boundaries were successful when other people understood them. Now I know a boundary is successful when I honor it even if they do not. The loan is gone from my credit. The property my parents sold is gone. Jenna's studio is gone. Dad's reputation as the unquestioned family fixer is gone. The comfortable version of our family is gone too. Those were consequences. Necessary ones. But they are not the image I carry when I think about the story. I carry the bouquet. Mom taking it. Jenna accepting it. Me taking it back. There was no long speech in that moment. No evidence packet. No police report. No prosecutor. Just one decision. This is mine to choose. That decision turned out to be bigger than the flowers. It applied to my identity, my money, my wedding, my relationships, my time, my forgiveness. My family had spent years treating all of those things as resources that could be redistributed toward whoever needed them most. I do not live that way anymore. I used to think being strong meant I could survive whatever people put on me. Now, I think strength is also knowing what was never yours to carry. Sometimes strength is not rescuing someone you love. Sometimes it is letting the consequence finish its work. Sometimes it is refusing to make yourself smaller so someone else can avoid feeling their own failure. And sometimes it is as simple as taking a bouquet back and placing it in the hands of the person you chose. My mother was right about one thing. Family can come first, but never again by putting me last. You should never let love become permission for someone to use your money, identity, time, or choices without consent. Protect your boundaries early, document what matters, and let people face the consequences of their decisions. If this story meant something to you, subscribe for more family drama stories.